really too close to call, not the situation in Georgia. Georgia obviously was the closest election of 2020. Not this year. Donald Trump being called winner by NBC News, 50.8 to 48.3%. In Nevada, 6 electoral college votes. There we go, at stake again, very, very early here. I think what we are getting at, we're going to get to Frank Collin in a moment, is that despite the fact that this was for months being called one of the most closest races in history, it may not end up being. Actually, may not be even top 5 or top 10. We're gonna find out. All right, we're gonna get to Frank Collin in a second. We are gonna go though to the balance of power. Remember, key Senate and House races also at stake. Let's find out where those stand with Emily Wilkins in D.C.
Hey, Brian. Well, as NBC has called, the Senate is in Republican hands for the next 2 years. Republicans flipped 2 key races, West Virginia, which was not a surprise, and Ohio, which was a really big one. It wasn't sure if Sherrod Brown would be able to hold on, but at this point, Republican Bernie Moreno is the projected winner there. And now it's just a question of exactly how big that Republican gain will be. We're still watching a number of swing states at this hour, and these are all very tight races. It's tight in Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, and of course you still have Montana, another really good pickup, potential pickup for Republicans. Swinging on over to the House, there are a lot fewer toss-up races that have been called, but one that's really caught my eye is Pennsylvania's 8th congressional district. This is in the northeastern part of the state. It was held by Democrat Matt Cartwright. He held it even as the state got more and more red, and yet now NBC News is projecting that he has been defeated by Republican Rob Bresnahan. And so this, to me, as we kind of keep an eye on Pennsylvania, on the state, so many key races there, this is, for me, a bit of an early indicator as to how voters are thinking about candidates this time, ousting a longtime Democratic in the state and replacing him with a Republican who really did campaign on some kind of principles that usually are considered more Democratic. Things like union support. He made that a really big crux of his campaign. And now tonight you've seen it paid off for him. So we can continuing to watch these key House races in Pennsylvania as well as elsewhere. But guys, it could take a while for the House to be called. There are a number of competitive races in California, and it, as we know from past experience, could take a while for that state to come in.
So we're waiting and we're watching this, and many of those are too close to call, even where the results are coming in. With us on the desk tonight, former Senator Heidi Heitkamp of North Dakota. I'm just curious, when you're looking at these congressional races and the Senate races, how much do those races come down to pocketbook issues? Is it the same issues driving the turnout for voters as we're seeing in the presidential election?
You know, it's interesting because we've done a lot of analysis at One Country, which is a C4 that I started to talk about Democrats talking to rural Americans and reintroducing Democratic policies. But what's interesting is the Senate has been a predictor of what happens in the presidential. So if the presidential goes in that state, usually the Senate race will go that within a certain margin. And so in these 3 states that we're talking about, the blue wall, there's 3 Senate races in those races, one an open race in Michigan. And the polling consistently has shown that all of those candidates can outperform Harris, that they, maybe anywhere from 3 to 1% better. And so if she's not successful in the blue wall, that jeopardizes 3 Senate seats. And so we've nationalized the Senate in ways that have never been done before. I talked about 5 states left where you have a Democrat or a Republican, a mixed. Ohio, Montana, both of which are in jeopardy. Wisconsin, you could see Wisconsin now having a complete Republican district. So the only one left after this, if we lose those states, would be Pennsylvania, because Pennsylvania would flip. There'd be a Democrat and a Republican.
Where McCormick is currently ahead, by the way, by about 110,000 votes, according to NBC News. We are covering this not only from a political aspect, a lot of people are doing that, but we are doing this in a unique CNBC way and letting the markets and your money tell the story. So let's get more on some things that are moving right now as the markets move. Send it over to Frank Collin.
Thank you very much. I'm here with Tim Seymour from Seymour Asset Management, also Gunjan Banerjee from the Wall Street Journal. We both, three of us, have been looking at our phones, just kind of watching what's going on as these different states have been called. We talked a lot about the Trump trade. Bond yields have gone up. We've seen the dollar make some upside moves. But, Tim, I want to come over to you. We haven't seen futures move really at all in the last 2 hours. What does that say to you?
Well, it's fascinating. We got that first spike in futures after Dade County was clear, and an expected, but to the magnitude, and that was a bit of a predictor. Futures shot up, and in fact, futures have probably been sideways more or less since about 9:30 p.m. If you think about the move in bond yields, again, we spiked up 15, 16 basis points on that 10-year up to 446, and that's also pulled back. The dollar up 1.5% has pulled back. So I think the sense is that people were positioned for a lot of this, and this is really what we've seen.
All right, so you've seen a lot of positioning for a possible Trump victory is what you're saying, and that's why we've seen kind of the markets move sideways. I talked about that about an hour ago when we were looking at the markets. They've kind of flatlined in recent times. Gunjan, I want to come over to you. You've done a lot of coverage of investors overall. So we talked about some of the currency moves, the gains the dollar's had against the yen, the Chinese yuan, but there's another currency that's making some big moves against the peso. What does that tell us about investors?
That's right, Frank. We're really seeing the Trump trade rippling across global markets, whether it's treasuries, the peso, other currencies, crypto, even Tesla. All of these assets are getting hit. And what investors were telling me was that they were surprised with the speed with which the Trump trade has been rippling through markets. Even before a lot of these polling results started coming in, investors started piling into it. But I think where you're seeing it the most is the typically stayed market for government bonds. And investors have been telling me that that's really where the action has been. We've also seen inflation expectations rise just over the past few hours in anticipation of a possible Trump win.
We were also talking about the fact that we have overnight trading. We're able to see the moves in a DJT, the moves in a Coinbase. So, Gunjan, that's a pretty stark difference from what we've seen in previous elections, the fact that we have this overnight trading and also these proxies that are tied to a specific candidate.
The 24-hour casino is open, and it's completely changed how people play the election. Investors have never had this many ways to trade the U.S. election. I was texting with an individual investor earlier today who was opening up her Robinhood account. She was placing a bet that in the prediction market that Trump would win the presidency. That's never happened before. Investors simply haven't been able to do that legally, and it's completely changed the face of this race and even rippled into the bond market, into the stock market. I think this is a huge test for this brand new, newfangled market where it's been predicting a Trump win, and now, other markets are coming around to that as well.
All right, Tim, let's talk some more about this newfangled market that Gunjan's talking about. We mentioned that the futures have been flat, but it's also important to note small caps have been the best performer, up over 2%. A lot of that tied to a Trump trade, but we can't forget there's also a Fed decision coming up.
Fed Thursday, the question really with all these inflation expectations now and the bond market doing what it's doing, I think the Fed's going to do their 25 basis points on a cut. But the question really is, what's that statement going to look like? It was a Fed meeting that I think we were focused on, but I think dynamics are clear. I mean, and look at what gold's doing. Gold has actually pulled back, and that conversation about predictability, gold was in play going into elections because of a lack of predictability. And I think if you look at what's going on here, and I would just say that equity markets, if you think about where we were on that fateful day on August 5th, equity markets are up 15% to this point from even just a month and a half ago. So that's something I think investors need to contemplate. Positioning coming into this was almost as if it's turned out the way it is. Let's see where we get in terms of outcome on clean sweep, red sweep. Right. I think futures will react to that if that's a place we get to later this evening or today, I should say.
Yeah, I know we got kind of some mix-ups about what yesterday, today is. Before we get to the futures, let's talk about the markets that are trading right now, the Asian markets. Give us a sense. When you look at the action on the Asian markets, specifically the Hang Seng under a lot of pressure, a lot of big-name stocks in there like Alibaba, also BYD's also in that index as well. What is that telling you just about investor confidence in a possible sweep and also the general sense of the tariffs being something as opposed to from a proposal to an actual reality with the idea that former President Trump has an advantage at least so far. Again, the election has not been called.
Yeah, look, China's been a tough trade. I would say sentiment towards China is about as low as it's been, and even before necessarily the Trump dynamic. I think if you look at how investors have been trading baskets that could give them exposure to companies that will be particularly hurt by tariffs. And I mean U.S. companies. I mean, a Dollar Tree, a Lululemon, maybe a Nike. I mean, there are people that are assessing the Asian impact of Trump policy. If you look at Japan, the yen is significantly weaker again. That's probably good for an export economy, an economy that also might be, look, they're an ally. And I think that's something that actually might play to Japan's favor. If you look at those stock markets, no question Asia should be reacting. The world's reacting. But I think the reality is that China, those 60% tariff headlines are things that I think investors are still very fearful of.
I know you want to talk about the U.S. futures. As we look ahead to the U.S. futures, what kind of action are you expecting? And are you expecting to see some shorting of some stocks that may be vulnerable to quote-unquote Trump policies? I know there's been a lot of analyst notes out. Again, this isn't us, and this is analysts. Stocks like a FedEx, a C.H. Robinson, their business model may be in jeopardy with the idea of these tariffs being increased. And other stocks, especially in the commodity space, a lot of analysts have come out saying Nucor, Cleveland-Cliffs would benefit from a Trump presidency.
Well, if you remember back the steel tariffs back in President Trump 1.0, let's see if this is 2.0, but when he threw those tariffs on China steel, I mean, U.S. Steel as a company fell almost 40%. I'm not sure it's an environment that's great for steel companies. I think tariffs for commodity players, the question really, the jury's out whether that's a good thing. So commodities with the dollar spiking higher will be under some pressure as well tomorrow.
All right. Tim Seymour, Gunjan Banerjee, thank you very much. Contessa, we're going to toss things back over to you.
Frank, thank you very much, and thank you to Gunjan and Tim as well. All right, you're watching Your Money, Your Vote here on CNBC. We're watching the election returns come in. It is too close to call at this point, but Donald Trump has won some key and critical states, including Georgia and North Carolina. Also, notably, NBC News has projected that the Republicans will now control the Senate. Quick break here. We'll be right back.
Right, welcome to a markets check here from Europe as well. You've been hearing a lot about the so-called Trump trades on our U.S. programming. Let's check in on a few market reactions. First of all, of course, Treasuries. Is this where we're going to see the most action? A lot of people focusing on the equity market as well. But what does potential victory for Republicans in a whole host of races, what does that potentially mean for the U.S.? Well, it means potentially more issuance, larger deficits, potentially larger growth, potentially. So what does that mean for what the Federal Reserve will be doing this week in December and thereafter as well? Indeed, the composition of the Federal Reserve has been talked about quite a lot as well. We're seeing a 4.424% yield on the pivotal 10-year level. In terms of dollar index, again, we've been hearing all night the dollar firming up across the board. That is more than firming up, actually, 1.5% in the green for the dollar, which means a lot of the key pairs, you're seeing weakness on some of the, like the euro, like sterling. Let's take a look at those dollar crosses as well. The pound currently down 1.3%. Of course, we've got a Bank of England rate decision, which I'll be bringing you tomorrow. Currently, the sterling pound is down 1.3%. We've got the euro dollar losing 1.7%. We haven't talked a lot about transatlantic relations. How fraught will they be between the Commission, between Germany, between Europe, especially if indeed there is a Republican government which increases tariffs on a global basis. That is something a lot of people are looking at. The yen losing 1.5%. Asian indices look like this. We heard from Brian there and Frank that the Nikkei surging up 2.4%. The Hang Seng down 1.97%. We're going to take a look also at some of the absolutely pivotal news we are seeing out of Europe as well. We've got a big bid situation potentially building up. Of course, UniCredit has taken that aggressive stake in Commerzbank. Later on European programming, we're going to speak to the key people. We'll speak to Andrea Orcel and Bettina Orlop over the next 24 hours as well. UniCredit figures, as we've come to expect from Andrea Orcel's group, which has rallied 83% over the past 12 months. Big numbers here. Third quarter net profit, 2.51 billion euros versus the expected figure of 2.27 as well. Net commissions, 1.94 billion. That is in line with expectations. They expect the net profit guidance to be above 9 billion euros in 2024. Now on to the prey. Bettina Orlop's group, Commerzbank. Well, as you might expect from a group trying to defend itself, improving full-year outlook result after 9 months. They are saying they are ahead of plan. The outlook for the full-year net result target, 2.4 billion euros, confirmed as well. So by and large, a lot of news here. We're waiting for the opening calls in Europe. Could be a very interesting session on the volatility front. That's it for now. We're going to hand you back to our colleagues stateside.
welcome back to CNBC. You're watching right now a live scene from Palm Beach, Florida, where former President Donald Trump is expected to speak at his campaign's headquarters at 1:15 in the morning. Here we are at the Convention Center in West Palm Beach, Florida. When we see him on stage, we will bring that to you when it happens. I should mention that at Kamala Harris's campaign headquarters at Howard University in Washington, D.C., a spokesperson came out and told the crowd, thank you very much for coming. It's not over, but for now, we're going to shut this down, and she will speak to you tomorrow, although he really meant today. And so there we're seeing some of the crowd that has gathered out there in Palm Beach to...
I think the really smart thing for him to do here is to not claim victory. Because he's this close. If he comes out and says, well, wait until tomorrow, he lets her concede, there's much more legitimacy given all of the rancor about whether he would declare victory prematurely.
And he has not won. We want to make that very clear. He has 246 electoral votes, but under that basic math, if he were to take Pennsylvania and or Michigan or Wisconsin, that would get him 270. There we see Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in the crowd, thought to be potentially part of a Trump cabinet. Again, should the former president become the first president since Grover Cleveland, and only one of two, to win with a gap, not consecutive back and forth. Grover Cleveland won, lost, came back, won again. We'll see what happens. We are joined now on the telephone by one of America's greatest entrepreneurs. He is a friend to CNBC as well. He is the owner of the Houston Rockets, Landry's, hundreds of restaurants, casinos, et cetera, and that is Tillman Fertitta. Tillman, I know it's later, 12:15 in the morning, but I know you're a night owl. Thanks for joining us here. From a businessman's perspective, do you change anything about the way your multitude of companies operate under either administration? And we know which way it's looking like we may end up.
Well, things are going to operate totally different because you're not going to have all the commissions that are harassing businesses, the SEC, the FC, the FAA even. You have all these commissions that are five-person commissions, and they're different than they are under a Republican administration. And so it's going to be a lot easier for everybody to operate in business. You used to go sign up a deal and hire the bankers and then go get the lawyers. Now you have to go hire the lawyers first to even see if you can possibly get the deal through the FTC. So this is going to change everything. You'll see the M&A activity totally ramp up again in the United States.
So if a Tillman Fertitta wanted to build a new Golden Nugget casino in a state, I know there's a lot of state regulatory authorities that are involved as well, Tillman, but on a national scale, you believe it would be easier for you and your team to go out and either build or buy new businesses?
100%. And I've dealt with two different commissions on two different issues, and one of them didn't go my way, and the other one, I was told by my Democratic advisors, you will never get through this commission because of the chairman, because you are a Republican. This was a truly been weaponized White House.
Yeah,
and I saw it myself.
Brian, let me jump in here. A point Tillman's making goes to pending cases. We're in the unique position where several of these regulators have said, I'm bringing cases that I know I may lose, but I want to change behavior anyway. If we do have a shift in administration...
Why would they do that? Just to bully?
Because I don't think the law is strong enough. And they're saying we want to change. Lena Khan has said that. She said she is interpreting the law in a new way and pushing people to do new things.
Well, let me Tillman used the words, Jay. It's Jay Clayton Tillman, the former SEC chair. Tillman used the words. Let me ask you straight up, Jay. Do you think that some of these acronyms, as we talk about, these three-letter agencies, are they bullying and harassing business?
I think they're pushing beyond the bounds of the law. The courts have found that. And what's very interesting is I think for pending cases, they should do a review. Now, I will bet you that 90%, 70% of the cases are down the middle of the fairway and routine. But there are probably 30, 20% of the cases where you can say, you know what, this is clearly what the courts have told you can't do. It's clearly bullying. They should review them, and if that's the case, they should drop them.
Tillman,
so what happens, Brian, let me tell you what happens is that you do these multi-billion-dollar deals and you have a bank commitment. So what they do, and the bank commitment runs out 9 months, 12 months, 15 months later. So what happens is they don't tell you no. They never give you a yes. And the contract date expires and your commitment for financing expires. That's how they do it. And they've done it over and over again in the last 4 years.
Yeah, we've seen it and we've documented it here on air at CNBC. I'm curious, Tillman, it's Contessa. When you're looking at your many businesses, many of which are reliant on consumer discretionary spending, another Donald Trump administration is largely seen by experts that it could increase inflation and make things more expensive. Are you concerned at all about your customers and whether they're going to be able to afford a night at the Rockets or a night out at your restaurants?
Contessa, I understand the question, but I've never seen it before. What is Donald Trump going to do? Okay, say he does the tariffs. If the tariffs happen one way, it should protect us another way. Okay, so I don't get what you're truly asking me. Is it where is he going to wave a magic wand? What happened was with inflation is that we put so much money in people's pockets for 3 years in 2021 and 22 that so much money was spent and there was a supply and demand that we couldn't even keep up with customers.
Yeah, and when the pandemic,
yes. And that's what caused inflation was just strictly supply and demand. That even today, because people do not work like they used to, it's hard for anybody still. It used to take you 9 months to build a restaurant. Today it takes you 14 months. It used to take you 4 months to get a permit. It takes you 8 months to get a permit. Everything is just different today. And Trump isn't going to be able to wave a magic wand and fix that. Okay? We just have to make people go back to work every day, and try to keep the economy moving like it is.
One of the other issues that voters have said is very important to them, and Brian was talking about driving through, the Midwest and hearing it over and over again, is immigration. How do you see immigration in terms of hiring and finding enough labor and talent? Do you need Congress to go back at it again? They failed to pass immigration reform. People who are here legally applying for asylum can't work. So you've got a lot of people who are not legally permitted to work. Do you need them to be able legally to work?
100%, it's what we need. And this is my biggest issue with immigration. And you got to understand, I am in businesses. I love the Hispanic employee who wants to come over here and work hard and support their family. But they don't even let them. They want the United States government to support them. They will not even give them a temporary work visa while they are over here. So you could sit right there and you can watch them lined out in those streets in New York and coming down from the hotels. And there can be a business right there that has a help wanted sign, and they cannot go in there and work. And because if we hire somebody who doesn't have the proper documentation, we get fined. Okay? But yet they can sit there on the curb and go cash their checks. The system is broken. It has to be fixed. You can't let the people in here and then make them wait possibly years to get a work visa.
I will say, too, one of the interesting things that you're seeing as election results come in and as people say what's top of mind for them, the Republican governors who put migrants on buses or on planes and sent them to northern cities, to Democratic strongholds. It was a brilliant political move because what it did was it shared the burden. It turned bleeding hearts in New York City, and I know, into people who question, right, it's not that we don't care about people, it's that it really overloads the system. And so this issue of immigration it should not be a White House problem. This should be a congressional problem. It's a problem for the Senate and for the House to tackle and get legislation done.
Well, and we'll see if that can happen because, again, the election is not settled. The Senate is not settled. The Senate certainly looks like it's going to be going Republican. NBC News, we're waiting on the House, as Emily Wilkins has talked about. Tillman's going to stick around as well. Let's bring in another voice into this as well, which is Mark Short, former chief of staff to Vice President Mike Pence and a CNBC contributor. Mark, we've got Senator Heidi Heitkamp here. Of course, we've got former SEC Chair Jay Clayton and Tillman Fertitta, a billionaire owner of the Houston Rockets, Landry's Restaurant Empire, and Golden Nugget Casinos. Mark, how shocked are you? This was supposed to be an historically close election. It may still end up being that way, but it may also end up not being that way. It's not over yet, but the results certainly are one way. To what do you ascribe this strength of Trump over Harris? Are there one or two business and money issues you think are critical to this move?
Well, sure. I think that 70% of America says we're on the wrong track. I think that you've seen a regulatory state that's oppressive for a lot of businesses across America. I think you've seen inflation that was driving a lot of the unrest the first couple of years of this administration. And so I think the policies of the Biden-Harris administration, this is really an indictment against them. I'd say the biggest surprise, Brian, is that I think where you're seeing Trump really overperforming tonight is in the minority communities, which I think in light of some of the commentary, I think the media would be really surprised to see how well he's doing in Latino communities and how well he's doing in African-American communities. That's really driving him to a race that I think was going to be close. But it really, I think, the more and more numbers that come in, it appears it's actually not even that close.
Yeah, and by the way, we are expecting former President Donald Trump to likely address some of his supporters in southwestern Florida, southeastern Florida, very soon. Tillman, I want to go back to you. You were talking about your frustration with the red tape and bureaucracy and being able to do a deal 9 months to 14 months. If we get a split Congress, things may still be held up. If there is, and there is the chance, about 75%, according to prediction markets, of a Republican sweep, White House, Senate, House. As one of the most successful business people in the United States, what would you want jobs 1 and 2 to be in a new administration?
Well, you want a good economy, and I don't think there's a problem with jobs. The people are out there. I think that's your question. I'm trying to put it in a box here, but I think that even without the House, I think the president will be able to do some executive orders to keep things going the way they are today. But I do think that we're going to fix inflation. Inflation has come down, okay? People are not voting Trump back in because of just the economy. We do not have a bad economy. They are voting him in because of so many different issues. Huge issue I hear in Texas and New York, and I'm in both places, is people really struggle with men and women's locker rooms, and that is a huge issue. And a lot of women that have a problem with their own rights could not get past this progressive movement that they want to have out there.
I think, and Senator Heitkamp, you and I were talking about this, the commercial break, what Tillman is bringing up, and I know, listen, it's a politically charged point, and we're going to mostly hit this from a business perspective, but we also have to address maybe why the election is going the way it is. And something I noticed in all of my road trips in 16 and 2020 and then this year was that I think Tillman's exactly correct. There was a Democrat for 40 or 50 years that was a labor Democrat, was a blue-collar Democrat, right, Tillman? A plumber. They liked the Steelers. They liked watching the Cowboys. They liked drinking the Budweiser. They liked America. They were proud to be American. They have, as the Democratic Party appears in many places, to have shifted to more progressive issues. Those are not issues that the plumber in Pittsburgh is going to be on board with, and it goes to your earlier point that the Democrats may have a larger problem than just tonight.
Well, I mean, probably the most powerful ads, especially in Senate races, were on transgender issues. And so we can't ignore the cultural aspect. And so as Trump has been very pro-working man, I mean, he especially on trades and tariffs. And so he spoke to their concerns economically, supporting a farm bill and farmers speaking to their economic concerns. That opens up the door to have a whole discussion about expanding the dialogue to go into other places. And I totally agree. I think these cultural issues haven't gone away. I think that there is a huge and very troubling gender gap in this country that needs to be addressed. And if you think it's bad now, take a look at young men and young women. It's getting wider. And we have to address it.
And we're just pulling up the futures right now, and you can see that they're up in a big way. The S&P 500 up 1.23% right now. Dow Jones Industrial is indicated to open by more than 600 points, almost 700 points higher. So here you're already seeing the reaction. Jay Clayton, former SEC chair, is with us on the desk, and Mark Short, who's the former chief of staff to former Vice President Mike Pence, and a CNBC contributor, joins us, as well as Tillman Fertitta. Jay, talk a little bit about this reaction that you're seeing.
Look, it's clearly a reaction to both certainty. We're going to have a certain result. We're not going to have friction, and a belief that the Trump plans are better for the market performance. That's what we're seeing at this moment.
And to be clear, we have not called the race. There are so many races, state battleground races, that are too close to call.
But if he wins, if he wins Pennsylvania, and NBC News has not called it, it would be, I believe, 264. You would only need one more state to take the 270 to win. By the way, NASDAQ futures contests up 280 points. General Motors, and we're looking at the Robinhood trade, by the way, fairly liquid, trading real time. GM and Ford, they're both higher. Maybe that's a pro-worker, or maybe a reduction of the EV tax credits, where GM and Ford feel less political pressure to have to go down into money-losing electric cars. Humana, UNH, United Health Group, they're up 3%. Health insurers seen potentially benefiting more under a Trump presidency, whereas the hospitals, the tenants, the HCAs, they would actually benefit more under a Harris administration. So the insurer stocks are up. MasterCard, by the way, which may benefit from less regulation, which Tillman was talking about, up 0.6%. Tillman, it's interesting you said we have a good economy. How much, and you've got different levels and price points all over the United States. And a Mastro's in uptown Houston is packed all the time, but you also got more rural restaurants. Are you seeing any discernible trends in the economy?
Where you are seeing a problem right now is in your higher end, not your more casual. Where you are seeing it is in those super high-end restaurants with $150 and $180 check averages. But you also have to remember, you have to go back to reality and look at 19's numbers, because 21 and 22 and part of 23, we were using monopoly money. There was so much money in the system that high-end retail, high-end restaurants, people were just getting so much money from the government. So we're really just back to more of a reality now. And reality in 19 was not a bad place to be. So if we can just stay there, I think everybody is going to be fine. Now, it's contested seas. It's a little soft in Vegas and game right now. But you've got to remember, they're so much higher than 19's numbers. We're still, all of these companies, individual properties, are doing 15 to 25% more EBITDA per property than they did in 19.
And dealing with a lot more wage pressure, because the unions were very successful in getting historic contracts. They've never gotten as big a raise as they got. And by the way, you had Donald Trump out there promising all of these hourly workers that they wouldn't have to pay taxes on their tips. And then Kamala Harris came out and said, right, I'm with that too, no taxes on tips. Nobody was pointing out that it might hurt people in the long run when they're not socking that money away into their Social Security account. When they're old, not having that Social Security money coming back to them could actually be a problem. Tillman, it's great that you bring up Vegas, because it kind of stands as the bucket list of American trips. The Las Vegas Strip is still immune from any sort of inflationary pressure that are being felt in other places around the country. The regional casinos have had a bigger problem. Mark, when you're, I mean, I don't mean to get into gambling, but I know gambling pretty well in the business of gambling. Not like Tillman Fertitta does, but, you know, as far as reporters go. Mark, when you're looking at the nation and what is going to make people feel like America's on the right track, got 75% of Americans in an ABC Ipsos poll that was released just last Sunday saying America's on the wrong track. What does it take to get these people feeling like, hey, we've got it pretty good. We live in the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Contessa, I think it's several fronts. I think economically, I think Jay hit on it before, that the regulatory state has simply been too oppressive. I think that socially, I think that there's been a pursuit of a woke agenda by the left, and you've highlighted some of that with the transgender issues. I think it's broader. I think that's why there's been a lot of the crossover from Latino and African American communities to support Trump this go round. But I also think internationally, you know, it appears that the world is on fire. And I think that a lot of the Biden support began to erode with his disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. And so I think collectively that mood from America is saying we want a change in leadership. I think that the demand for change is pretty clear. And I think that by nominating Harris after Biden, it's too hard for her to distance herself and say she would be different. I think she's tied to that administration. And so Democrats didn't have an ability to say we're going to be something different. And America was yearning for a different course than what they've been experiencing over the last 4 years.
There were a lot of Republicans after January 6th that parted the ways ideologically with then President Trump, that they decided that the Republican Party wasn't heading in the right direction. When you look at the results rolling in tonight, it looks like Trump has truly recaptured the beating heart of the Republican Party, and that those who distance themselves from him do so at their own peril. How do they act in the nation's best interest, in business's best interest, with him in the White House really setting the doctrine and the path forward for Republicans?
Yeah, Contessa, I think there's no doubt that he has command over the party today. As I say, I don't know another Republican who could have done as well as he did in minority populations. Having said that, I think that the Trump campaign this time is very different than what he governed as in Trump 1.0. So as much as I was a fan of, and before being Pence's chief of staff, I was Trump's Legislative Affairs director when we passed tax reform. I think that he's walked away from so many of those positions, and he's campaigned very differently. Whether or not, you know, it's simple things like saying he's now going to go back on the SALT deduction, which I know is appealing for some people in your audiences, or whether or not it's taking a position on trade that is vastly different, or whether or not it's taking a position that he was where he was on TikTok and flip-flopping on that. Or whether or not it's walking away from his commitment to life that he advanced in his first administration. And so I think that there's a lot of things that are very different in a Trump 2.0. I'm not sure most voters recognize that because their mental model is what it was for the first 4 years.
Let me jump in here and talk about the Trump economy. It had something pretty remarkable that people didn't think was going to be possible. That is, we had 3% GDP growth, 3% real wage growth, less than 3% unemployment, all with low inflation. If you told the American people you can have that economy back, that was the economy through 2019 and 2020. Now Heidi's going to jump in and say we were running a deficit, okay? But we were running a lot lower deficit than people projected. There was much greater revenue produced by the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, but those numbers were numbers that people said were not achievable, particularly the real wage growth and the real wage growth among African American and Hispanic people. Those were great achievements, and people would take that again.
People just conveniently
100%.
forget the last year of his presidency and write it off to COVID. He promised us he'd protect us from all injury. And so if you look, he had negative GDP growth the last year of his term.
We shut down all of our cities. I want to get to this point. Mark Short, I think, and Tillman and I have talked about this ad nauseum because we live here. We live in the New Jersey, New York area. Okay, now I'm going to get a little bit fired up. Okay, need another cup of coffee.
Now?
Decaf, which is, we were locked down here for about a year and a half in this area. In fits and starts, okay? Then I'd get on a plane, and I'd go to Houston.
and there'd be a 2-hour wait at one of Tillman's restaurants, right, in late 2020. I went to Charleston, South Carolina, Mark Short, in February of 2021. And I don't want people out there to say that, you know, oh, you're being irresponsible, whatever. I went home and I went right to the basement. And this is all by car for the most part. 3-hour wait at a restaurant in Charleston. I came back to New Jersey, and people were still tucked away. Everything was shut down. Couldn't go to church. Kids were still remote on their iPads. Mark Short, and I'm just going to tell you something, that we'll wait and see how the final vote comes out across all these things. But I believe, and you comment, say I'm wrong or not, and Tillman can jump in too, that the lockdown of extended lockdown of schools and churches, still resonates on many suburban moms' minds.
Absolutely, Brian. I had this conversation with Heidi in one of your earlier panels, and I totally agree with you that I think that lockdowns were so oppressive on our Democrat governors that I think that has a big impact as well. I absolutely agree with you on that point.
Yeah, New Jersey.
You know,
go ahead, Tillman.
I was on Governor Abbott's committee, and do you realize that this happened on February the 20th? And we opened up Texas on March the 1st. Not March the 1st. We opened it up on May the 1st. That Texas was open again. And the one thing that we paid attention to for the next 18 months, as I watched so many of my other properties closed all around America, was our percentage of cases per population any more than any other states. And it was not.
It was all the same.
And I'm going to tell you something. Exactly what you said a few minutes ago, I believe it was Mark, is 4 years later, people are thinking about that and what happened to their families, the amount of families that broke up, the amount of people that died from non-COVID ailments because they were scared to go into the hospital because once they got there, nobody could come see them or they couldn't get in. And I'm going to tell you, that's part of this election right now, and it's something that we haven't even talked about. But when people walked in there and they think about Democratic control, that we're going to control you and tell you what to do.
I think every American should be asking, do we have a better plan today than we did in 2020 for dealing with a pandemic? I personally don't think so. I haven't seen one review by the federal government of whether it was appropriate to shut down or not shut down and how you open up.
You know they're never going to do that.
But if you think that was such a motivating factor, this idea that the government would go in and control you and tell you what to do with your bodies, then why wasn't abortion the driving factor? Why are we seeing the results so skewed?
I don't know. What I'm saying is that I'm looking at New Jersey. New Jersey went to Harris, but by the smallest margin to a Democrat in, I think, 30 years. It's going to be a 5-point margin in reliably blue New Jersey, which was, I think, 16 and 20 points to the good on the Democratic side the last two elections, a state in which I live in. Something, Contessa, I don't know what it is, Senator Heitkamp, maybe you do, has fundamentally changed.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can't use any of this in isolation. And I do think, I think the best thing that we can do is, rather than, kind of litigating the past, is think about what did we get right, what did we get wrong. We don't even hear that. I was part of a,
totally agree.
I was part of a Heritage Foundation effort to talk about whether China should be held accountable for what happened, for releasing the virus, when they knew it could be airborne, when they knew the damage it could take. There's never been a real legitimate look back on what happened during the pandemic. And did we make mistakes? I think absolutely. And I will tell you that as a parent, I think everybody's concerned about what happened with education and the fallback. But we have to, it was a deadly virus. It killed people.
And there are existential threats right now. In fact, both Donald Trump and Joe Biden have had to deal with horrendous hurricanes that have hit and have destroyed massive swaths of the nation. AI is an emerging technology that is changing our world faster than anything that we have ever seen. There are geopolitical uncertainties right now that could truly cripple not just our economy, but our nation as a whole. And Mark Short, when you're looking forward at what are the priorities for the next president, you said you're the former legislative director, what should be job number one for the new administration and for the new House and the new Senate?
Well, I think that both campaigns didn't have as much of a policy agenda as what they would do working with Congress, but I think that the top priority is going to be extending the tax relief from the 2017 legislation because, as you know, individual rate cuts expire in 2025. And so I think that's going to be the biggest battle. And the fact that I think the Senate is going to have more than 51 Republicans, I think, provides a little bit of a cushion that gives a better chance of extending that.
Contessa, you used a great word there, which is priorities. I think something that we're all saying, and we can all agree on, a lot of Americans were asking, what are the government's priorities? Are they spending money on migrants and not on my community?
We have breaking news coming in right now, Nebraska, and it looks like Donald Trump has picked up an additional electoral vote right now. NBC is projecting that he will get 4 of the 5 electoral votes. Earlier tonight, they had projected 3 of the 5.
They have a unique system in Nebraska where they don't all go to the same candidate. So that's why it's one of 2 where them in Maine. Yeah. Where you'll see that format.
And so we'll wait to see what happens with that 5th electoral vote again.
That's the Omaha district.
I don't think you can win that one. You can only win the 4. It's impossible in that district.
Yeah.
So next, your competitor has called Pennsylvania. So just to let y'all know.
But going back
NBC News has not called or confirmed Pennsylvania. As we have reported, Pennsylvania had over 90% of precincts reporting, with Donald Trump having a fairly sizable lead, but NBC News has not independently called or confirmed that, to be clear. But we may get one in a minute. Jay.
No, I was just going back to priorities because those constituents that we were talking about did not feel like they were prioritized by the Biden-Harris administration.
But it's also the adults in the room. And you know what I would put on the table? Permitting reform.
Absolutely.
I would bring in all the governors, all the mayors, and say, we cannot have people waiting 2 years to do a simple project. We have got to get moving on infrastructure. You talk about AI. Guess what? We don't have enough energy to run AI in this country. We've got to build infrastructure. We've got to build power lines. How are we going to do that if it gets stopped by the NIMBY?
And you can't solve how.
And by the way, we're going to go to Emily Wilkins in a second. I don't know if we can do this, guys. If we can, this is called Producing from the Desk.
Let's see it.
Which
I want
is
to see it.
Constellation Energy, CEG. Throw that up real quick if we can, and Robinhood, because Senator Heitkamp, it goes to what you're saying. The other day, FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, whacked the deal where Amazon was going to get power from a company called Talon Energy. They were going to buy it from Talon, which is a nuclear producer. On that news, Constellation fell, I think, 10% because kind of the entire nuclear swath got whacked because they thought, well, the government wants power, nuclear power, but it doesn't necessarily want technology to have it. They probably want it for homes. You can judge that all you want. But if we see a Trump victory and they deregulate that energy side because we need the nukes, a name like a Constellation, a name like a Vistra, Quanta Services that provides the actual power lines, they could, and Talon, by the way, or TerraWulf, WULF, they could benefit all at once.
And going back to certainty, if you don't have permitting reform, who's going to make the investment? Who's going to invest the capital? Only to be shut down 2 years later.
75% of the IRA money has yet to be spent. And we'll see if it is there to be spent, depending on what happens. Let's get right now to Washington, D.C. Emily Wilkins with some interesting exit polling data on Trump and independent voters. Emily.
Hey, Brian. Well, independent voters were one of the groups that this election we knew that we'd have to keep an eye on. And we are seeing now from this exit polling that Trump has made gains with them from where he was at in 2020. So let's just start off with what we're seeing now in 2024. Now, yes, for independents, Harris actually does have a bit of an edge here. She's got about 50% of independent vote compared to Trump's 45%. But go ahead, as we sort of are looking at these numbers come in, rewind the tape to 2020. There we saw Biden have 54% of the vote, while Trump was only at 41% when it came to independent vote. And so what you're seeing now is Trump has gone ahead, made these gains with these independent voters, the same way that we've seen him make gains this evening with Latino voters, same we've seen him make gains this evening with young men who have gone to the voting polls. And I think that is going to be, as we are looking at these states and as we are telling the story about what we're seeing tonight, certainly a big part of the narrative as to how Trump really got these groups, got their support and got them to turn out and vote.
Emily, thank you very much. We appreciate the big wrap up there. You know, it's interesting when we've been watching this tonight and the passion behind what was going into this race and the way that it's come down. It has been a very orderly accumulation of votes, a counting of votes, a departure from what we've seen and even what we were led to believe might happen.
I think it's what everyone hoped for.
Yeah.
When you talk to people, whatever side they were on, they would say, I hope my person wins, but I really hope we have certainty.
And to your, I'm going to quote Jay Clayton back to Jay Clayton right at the top of the show, which is, I think you made an incredibly important point, and Tillman and Mark, you guys can chime in as well, that we don't have a full election result yet, okay? But it appears that we are getting very close to a full result. Assuming the result holds, the numbers will be so large as to not be a result that can be contested. And I think what you're suggesting, Jay, is that however this went tonight, if the numbers went the other way to Vice President Harris, that it had to be big enough and clear enough that there weren't lawsuits and petty fights and accusations of theft and stolen elections. It appears to be large enough where we will have a clear result by, I would say tomorrow, Contessa, but it's actually today.
Yes, it is today. By the way, the video that you're watching right now is from Palm Beach, Florida. We are expecting former President Donald Trump to speak at any moment. We have been expecting this for some time. About an hour ago, we were watching the vice president's campaign headquarters at Howard University, where a spokesperson came out and told the crowd, listen, we're in it. We're not shutting down. We're just shutting it down tonight. And so they told the crowd to come home and said that they would hear from the vice president later.
And I have to say that I want to make sure that it's clear that New Jersey is not called, but New Jersey right now is within about a 5% range. I want to make sure that is very clear that New Jersey is not called, but it would be, if it was called now, as Steve Kornacki has posted, the closest within about 30
years. And I should make it clear that it's West Palm Beach, not Palm Beach, because the Floridians get very upset about that.
Maybe I can go to Tillman with this if he's still with us, which is I think the follow-on from what I was saying is tomorrow morning every business is going to ask themselves, what does this mean for me? What can I change? What investments can I make? How should I tack with what we think is going to be the result here? And that is very interesting because people are going to hit the ground running tomorrow with this level of certainty, I think, across the economy. We're seeing it in the markets tonight. We're going to start to see it in strategic decision-making and planning tomorrow morning.
Joining us now is MCC Production CEO Michelle Caruso Cabrera, also a CNBC contributor. We know her as our friend and former colleague. Michelle, it's good to see you. I know that you spent a lot of years watching these results come in and predicting what it might mean for markets, what it's going to mean for businesses, what it's going to mean for Wall Street and for Main Street. Give me a sense of, from where you're sitting right now, what you think.
So a couple of things. First of all, I think the reason you see futures rallying so much is that we're going to have a decisive moment tonight. We're going to know. I mean, all the planning for tonight was about, oh, what if there are lawsuits that go on for weeks or months? I mean, this is going to be even worse than, hanging chads. Well, that is not the case. We're going to have a decisive moment here. We're going to know who the President of the United States is going to be, and I think that's one of the reasons why you see the futures rallying, because we're not going to have that uncertainty. I think making other predictions is going to be pretty tough. The last time Trump won, there were the Mexican peso, for example, got hammered because he was so tough on Mexico during that election. And then guess what? They ended up renegotiating NAFTA. The Mexican peso rallied for years and only recently fell because of their election. So I think it's hard to make predictions about what's going to happen with markets. I will say there's some very basic things. She wanted to raise taxes a lot. He didn't. So that's one very basic thing. Tariffs are a big question mark. We don't know how big they're going to be, what the impact is going to be, but certainly those are going to be the things that business is thinking about. I think, I was interested in hearing Senator Heitkamp's comments about, reform when it comes to getting permitting done. I think one of the lessons that I think the Democratic Party has to learn is that the Elizabeth Warren wing of the party is not a successful wing of the party. Almost all the major things that are hurting Democrats in this race right now come from the progressive wing. The massive inflation that happened, the worst in 30 years, that was because of that massive spending project that Larry Summers told them, don't do it. Don't do it. It's going to cause inflation. They did it anyways. Loosening up at the border, that was also a decision driven by progressives. The anti-energy position of the party was also driven by progressives. These have all been rejected. And this should be a lesson, because Elizabeth Warren, to your point about permitting, she has been able to put her people, which she always says, personnel and process are policy, right? And that's what's happened. And you have to change that if the Democratic Party wants to win elections.
Yeah, and I do wonder, to MCC, to your point about the U.S. dollar rising, a little bit about Mexico. Mexico's in an interesting spot because, on one hand, they could be a beneficiary of any higher tariffs against China, right? Anybody remember the maquiladoras, right, which is the workers? But at the same time, Donald Trump has said he's going to slap a gigantic tariff on any American car that is or any car manufactured at EV in Mexico and then shipped to the United States. I think because he's worried that China would start building their own cars in Mexico.
They're already doing it.
They're doing it, and they're selling them in Mexico, but to backdoor them into the United States. I don't know, would this be, MCC, you think, a good thing for Mexico, because it takes, Mexico's threat is not America, it's China.
So I think last time I was in Mexico, and I said, wow, I mean, the northern part of the country is doing great. There's so much investment happening here. And they said, it's all Chinese. Yeah. You have to understand, it's Chinese coming here because they want to get around the tariffs that have been imposed on them. So that's going to be a battle that the U.S. is going to end up fighting with Mexico about trying to figure out, okay, who is actually producing there. The other issue is, last time around, it was, Donald Trump who didn't want to extend NAFTA, and we ended up with USMCA. The new president and the previous president have made so many changes that are actually go against the USMCA. So the renegotiation that begins next year is going to be very, very difficult, not just because of us, but because of them as well.
Right, let me point out that the Mexico issue with electric vehicles, there's a real-life experiment, which is Europe. Europe's already made this mistake, and they've become dependent on Chinese manufacturing of electric vehicles. We definitely do not want that to happen.
No. And you look at Europe with their energy policy, and I've been over there reporting for years, even before the Nord Stream was blown up, about their coming energy disaster. It hasn't been as worse as some predicted, thanks to U.S. LNG. And Mark, we go back to that, and Tillman, we go back to that. And Tillman, I want to come back to you in Houston, the area, because we were just there again looking at all the energy infrastructure. The Biden administration has put a pause, and that's their term, on environmental permitting review for really 2 to 3 big new LNG export terminals. They may end up not getting built. They may now. This is going to change that. You can imagine that on day one, if Donald Trump is indeed elected president, he will, and I know this from a lot of people I talk to, reverse those. How big has the energy investment and infrastructure story been for not only Texas, Houston, where you live, Tillman, but also southern Louisiana, where you have extensive properties? Tillman, are you still there? He is running a multi-billion-dollar business. Try to get him back on the phone.
He's off.
So, Mark Short, I will kind of ask you that same question. There's going to be significant energy, and kind of the world I cover, energy and infrastructure of energy policy changes enacted on day one. Should there be a change in the White House? Do you not agree?
100%. I wish I was running a multi-billion-dollar company, Brian, but without that, I do think that there's no doubt there'd be a significant deregulatory agenda in the energy industry. And as much affection as I have for Senator Heitkamp, And the reality is that the permitting reform obstruction has really been on the Democrat side. If we had more Democrats like Senator Heitkamp, then we could actually get something like that passed. But that has been the challenge. And so whether or not Democrats look to be pro-business in these coming years as a result of this election, we'll come and see. But to your question, Brian, there's no doubt that day one, the Trump administration will be more deregulatory when it comes to energy.
Joining us now is Jefferies chief market strategist, David Zervos, also a CNBC contributor. David, thanks. I've been watching futures here tonight up sharply as we've continued to watch the results roll in here. Give us a sense of how you're seeing the setup for investors for the rest of the week, the rest of the month, and the end of the year.
Well, before I do that, I'd just like to say how much I enjoyed this conversation, listening to you guys. And Tillman running off, he was probably listening to Jay earlier, who was talking about hitting the ground running on all this deregulation. And I think that's a big part of why these futures are up. I think companies are very, very excited about the idea that the stranglehold of regulation that they've felt for the last 3 and change years is about to come off. We think that's the biggest change in a Trump versus Harris win. We've highlighted that to our clients at Jefferies over and over again, that it wasn't trade, it wasn't immigration, it wasn't fiscal or monetary policy, but really regulatory policy. And I think that's the story. I am a little surprised it's not a bit higher. I think it feeds an idea that I had coming in, that a Trump win was probably more priced by Wall Street than, say, the betting markets or others, pollsters, had thought. I think Wall Street was definitely leaning Trump, at least in my casual observation of the clients that I speak to at Jefferies. So, I think, less than 2% in the S&P on a Trump win is probably a little light, but I think it's all in the right direction. Stronger dollar, stronger S&Ps, slightly higher rates. And I guess the other thing is, I think a lot of clients did push on this idea that rates would really move a lot higher under Trump, and we're not really seeing that. In fact, I think once we got news that the Senate was going red and sort of a full red, I think people thought maybe rates weren't going to go up as much because maybe some fiscal parsimony comes in with a red sweep.
So, David, we are showing the Russell 2000 E-mini futures. Want to throw those back up? They're up 3.5%. I mean, that's a pretty big move for the small caps, David. I guess on this idea, again, Trump has not been confirmed at anything, but if he does win this America First idea, 2 questions on rates. Number one, today's move not that great, but we've already backed up, 0.7% in the previous 30 days. So I wonder how much the market had anticipated this. Number 2, is Jay Powell the most nervous man in Washington, D.C. right now?
Number 2, definitely not. I think Jay's just fine. He's got a year and change left on this watch. He's going to go down as the guy that slayed the great COVID inflation. He's going to ride rates a little lower. He'll cut 25. He might have to fight with the Trump administration for the next year a little bit if he doesn't go fast enough lower. But, he's done it before, and he came out just fine. So I'm not worried about Jay. I think, he's going to go off and golf in South Florida when he's all done with his term in early 2026. And I think go down as one of the greats in Fed chair history.
Well, let me ask you a different question then. Again, assuming we have a Trump victory and he is about ready to address supporters at the campaign event, nothing has been called, but we see the direction where everything is. Does it change the direction of interest rates, given the debt maturity wall? What is it, 60% of U.S. debt is maturing in the next 5 years? These are scary, scary numbers, David.
We definitely moved the maturity structure of the debt shorter. I think under a Trump administration, the people that I think he's looking at for Treasury will probably look to change that a little bit, and that may weigh on long-term interest rates. We'll have to see. But I think there's a lot of good and positive stuff on why rates could come lower, with deregulation really being the lead there. That's a classic positive supply shock. It's lower inflation with higher growth. It's going to be led, as Jay said earlier. I think Jay answered your inflation question beautifully by just saying this is really about energy prices. And, Brian, I know that's your wheelhouse. I think we've all got to think about what a world of $50 oil looks like. And it looks pretty good from an inflation standpoint. It looks pretty good from an input to production costs going down standpoint. And that's going to be a big part of this Trump plan, assuming it goes as the markets are predicting today. And I think that's going to open up a sort of an avenue for the Fed to actually take rates lower, even as growth is strong.
Yeah,
but Brian,
hopefully, David, we can get those productivity gains that we've had as well.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at U.S. productivity, we're up 20% when a comparable European is under 10.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the result of technology. If we can have that as well, I think the upward pressure on rates can be mitigated. But I turn it to David because he's the expert.
Well, can I add to that? I was at the IMF World Bank meetings last week, and there was a lot of discussion about how Treasury was talking about the amount of issuance that they're going to have to start doing at the end of 2025. I mean, the planning calendar, when you start to have this much debt, it's like the way Italy does it, right? You have to plan years in advance because you have to, be ready. Or we can do 30s, 5 cents. They're talking about what kind of products are they going to bring out new kinds of products to try to get investors interested in all the issues.
Michelle, I've got to jump in because this is critical breaking news. NBC News, that's Nebraska. NBC News has confirmed that Donald J. Trump is the winner of Pennsylvania. We've got Nebraska on the board. They're going to switch it out. Pennsylvania, seen as really the prize. 19 electoral votes. Donald Trump, the projected winner, according to NBC News, for Pennsylvania. Donald Trump will be speaking in a couple of minutes in Florida. We're going to obviously go to him when he does begin to speak. Quickly, David, I want to go back to you. You mentioned $50 oil, and this is very important. A lot of people think that Donald Trump is, quote, good for the oil industry. I would argue he's probably good for the services companies like Baker Hughes, Halliburton, the ones that help people drill. But if we drill, baby, drill, and there's more supply than demand, I think your point is very well taken about $50 or even lower oil.
100%, Brian. But, I mean, we're talking about what's good for the American public. I know the oil companies are near and dear to many hearts of people who watch the shows here and trade the stocks. But this is something that will really change the balance for the American consumer and American business and people like Tillman, who you had on there, that has a pretty big energy bill with all the hotels and everything else that he's running. This is a big deal. It's a big story. And it really is, as Jay said earlier in one of the segments, this is the key to understanding Donald Trump's plan. This is how you get lower inflation, lower unemployment, and lower interest rates all at the same time, and not have a sort of standard Keynesian storyline that the only way to get inflation down is to kind of blow up the economy and raise the unemployment rate and weaken growth. We haven't seen that in this last 9 quarters. I don't expect we're going to see that again in the next 9 quarters ahead, and I think that can all come with lower energy prices. That is the real flank in the storyline for this administration, and it really, to me, looks like this return to the 2019 story that you guys were playing with in an early segment is the one you want to think about. A low unemployment rate of 3.5% to 4%, inflation back to the 2% target, a balance sheet at the Fed that is kind of right around 20% of GDP, which is where we started at because GDP's been so strong. The only thing that stands out is we had 1.75% interest rates back then, and now we have 4.75% interest rates. I think interest rates are coming down. They could be coming down pretty hard.
Yeah, I do want to say this about oil production. We stabilized the price around $70, and it made the United States the top producer in the world. And so there's a price point at which production in this country will decrease. And we saw that.
Where is that price point, you think?
I think it's 40. Okay. I think 40 will slow down anything, that 40 to 50 range, because you saw it. And you saw Donald Trump basically begging the Saudis back when oil prices were tanking to please help us stabilize oil prices, increase oil prices, so we could see some better profit margins in the oil field. And so I will say, I mean, are they too high? I think we can argue that. But understand that price point, it may not be economical for people to invest in shale.
Michelle Cruiser-Cabrera, and again, we are waiting on Donald Trump, so you know the game. I might have to jump in on you, not to be rude. But here's another angle. Drill, baby, drill, more production, maybe prices go down. But, and you've been there, by the way. You're one of the few Western journalists who's been there. Donald Trump will probably actually enforce the existing sanctions on Iran, will he not? Where he destroyed their foreign currency reserves and their oil exports, which have now quadrupled in the last 3 years.
Yeah, no, Iran is absolutely going to be very unhappy with the outcome of this election because he's going to be very, very tough on them. I'd say there's 2 oil-producing countries in the world that we could think about right now. Iran, number one, but also what's going to happen with Venezuela. I mean, I've seen data which shows that there are 1 million Venezuelans who want to leave and come to the United States. It's going to behoove the next president of this country to figure out how to stabilize Venezuela, one, so we don't have a continuing problem at the border, but two, so they too can start producing oil that'll reduce the number of people that want to come to the United States and help reduce the amount of supply that's in the world. Venezuela should be producing 6 million barrels of oil a day at this point, but they're only doing, you know, a couple 100,000. It's ridiculous. It's a very bad situation.
Michelle, I just want to point out right now, we've seen the futures jump even higher. Now the Dow futures are up over 750 points. We're taking a live look right now at West Palm Beach, Florida, where we are expecting former President Donald Trump, who has just been projected as the winner of Pennsylvania, to be speaking in Florida shortly. And there you were seeing the reaction. David, the markets have been speaking very clearly today about what they thought was going to happen and the optimism with which they see the result.
Absolutely, and I think it's been pretty orderly. I really do. I think it was early. It was grinding at first as the data came in, and I think we saw a very I can't think of a better word, orderly movement higher in stocks, lower in bond prices, and stronger in the dollar. I think the dollar move was probably the biggest from a standard deviation standpoint, kind of outside of its normal ranges. That's come back a little bit. Stocks kind of really in the range. I can't imagine if you own volatility on stocks, you made a lot of money owning one-day straddles on the S&P with just a 2% or 2 and change percent move. But again, I think these moves are all orderly. They're not out of the ordinary. This isn't like 2016 when we had a limit down or a limit up type story if it was going the other way. This feels pretty good for a market that I do believe was leaning toward pricing Trump much more than many had thought. I think that was more or less what was in the market. I wanted to just touch one thing on what Jay said about productivity. Jay, and I think you're right, this is a huge, huge storyline for us in the next 4 years, and we were getting a long way down the road to seeing it come back in 2017, 18, and 19 under Trump 1. Deregulation is what feeds productivity. If you take away that red tape, if you get those three-letter acronyms off people's backs that Tillman was talking about, including the FAA, which he mentioned, then you really free up time so that we can be more productive in the private sector. This is a huge, huge story. It is the biggest story for us in markets in this election. Dereg is what's going to drive us. I know we're going to spend time on fiscal policy and talk about debt walls and maturity. I know we're going to talk about Jay and the Fed and monetary policy. And some people are going to get worried about immigration policy if he starts doing deportations and labor costs. But the big, big story, the big, big positive story is dereg, and I think the center of that will be in the energy market.
I've heard that from multiple CEOs trying to get deals done or looking at deals that they would like to do and just hands off because they've seen what has happened with their colleagues who tried to do it. And to your point earlier, if you have the financing lined up and the agencies just don't come through with the license that you need in order to get the deal done, the financing dies.
Yeah, let's be clear. With today's technology, and you ought to be able to review deals. You ought to be able to do your regulatory job faster than you used to. Yeah. The truth is,
you can run it through ChatGPT.
It actually takes more time.
We're waiting on Donald Trump to speak. Nothing has been called yet from the NBC News desk. I want to make that extremely clear. Mark Short, though, listen, next year we have the expiration of the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Some people call them the Trump tax cuts. I call them the blue state payback because if you live in New Jersey and have higher deductions, that SALT deduction cap was actually a stealth tax hike. That aside, this expires at the end of next year. It was done that way because they did it under budget reconciliation. They had to do it. He wants to keep it. Kamala Harris had said she wants to carve it out for $400,000 and above. That's not possible because it's a law. What happens to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and maybe that SALT deduction cap? Asking for a friend.
Brian, my best guess here is that it gets extended more or less as it is. I think there'll be plans from Crapo in the Senate and Jason Smith in the House for how they want to tinker with it and change it. Jason Smith has said he wants the deduction on salt to raise significantly. I don't think there's going to be votes to do that. I think it's going to be basically best case scenario is we extend it, which obviously I think it was a great piece of legislation, and so I'm happy with extending it. If I go back for 1 second to something else you said, and I think America would be greatly served if Jay Clayton was our Treasury Secretary, but I do not necessarily agree with Jay's assessment about the Fed. I do think there'll be a lot more volatility there. I was in the Oval Office when Trump would yell at Steve Mnuchin for recommending Jay Powell. I was there when he dressed down Jay Powell. I think he's not going to have a patient approach to Jay Powell independence. I think he's going to have a lot more demands that interest rates come down faster. And so I'm not so sure that that relationship will lack volatility. I think there'll be a lot more volatility there than is being estimated right now.
That's interesting. Trump has, in fact, even said that he wants to be the head of the Fed.
Yeah, so can I just mention something? Let's assume that the Democrats take the House. Okay, so we're assuming a sweep right now. It flips. That the Democrats now, we have the Speaker in the House. That means you have to negotiate with Democrats the tax package. And so if it expires, you're going to see the SALT deduction go back to where it was. You're going to see the standard deductions go back down. You're going to see more people filing on Schedule A. And you're going to have a real conversation. So there's leverage for the Democrats. That Trump has said, or at least his running mate has said, we want to expand the child tax credit. So has the Democrats. This is a long goal of the Democrats. So I don't think, where I get what Mark's saying, I think that if the Democrats take the House, there is going to be a negotiation on what that tax package looks like. But I think they will basically extend a lot of the provisions that were favorable to the middle class.
I think the challenge with that, Senator, is that, you look at the most recent jobs report, and if you have more like that, then the part that's going to be raised is individual rates. And I'm not sure the Democrats want to be the ones raising individual rates next year heading into a midterm election. But if you do, go for it. I think that Republicans will have even more successful
Mark, I don't disagree with you. I'm just saying that it's not going to be easy. There's going to be a negotiation.
As we're watching the video of the podium being prepared for Donald Trump, I just want to say where we are in terms of the NBC News decision desk. Right now, it appears that Kamala Harris has 194 electoral votes. Donald Trump with 266. Crucially, Pennsylvania, NBC projects that he will be the winner in Pennsylvania and in Georgia as well. Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, still too close to call. Nevada and Arizona, still too close to call at this point. And I'm seeing Alaska still as
well. Yeah, and we don't know, Mark Short, how this is going to go. Like I said, I mean, it's all clearly in one direction. And we in the media kept saying this is going to be super close, because the polls were super close. I never felt that way going out and speaking to people. But that aside, it looks like, again, assuming no major change, it's not going to be that historically close of an election. The Senate looks like it's going to go Republican. There we go, 51. It already has. We're waiting on the House, to Senator Heidkamp's point. If you had to switch teams, where did the Democrats go wrong? What happened? Because 2022 was very strong for them in the midterms, particularly on the abortion issue.
Because President Biden moved too far to the left. He ran as a centrist. He said he was going to be a centrist, and then he listened to the progressives when he got into office. Let's go back to it. The huge spending package that led to the painful inflation for which Democrats are being punished right now. Changing tact on the border, which led to the chaos at the border that upset so many people. And then being so anti-energy was another thing. And so you add all those together, and I think that's where Democrats went wrong.
Mark? I would agree with that. I think the reality is that Donald Trump is unique in that he can appeal to minority populations. I think that's the biggest shift here. I think that, there's still, I think, some erosion in support in suburban America, but he's more than compensated that by winning over much larger numbers of Latino votes and African-American votes. And so I think that's the difference in 2022. The Republicans on the ballot were not able to get that minority support the way that he is.
And we're talking about, Heidi was talking about, Mark was talking about getting things through Congress, getting through the Senate. There's still an open Senate race in Pennsylvania that has not been called. There's a big difference between 52 and 53 in the Senate.
Huge.
Yeah.
Huge difference.
It's not just one.
It's not just one. It's like 50% better.
Because you've seen what's happened, that some people have come and gone. I want to say where we are, again, waiting for Donald Trump. Guys, can we bring up the Dow futures? Because, by the way, we're live here on CNBC. We got the best team in the business. We're doing this from a data, analysis, fact-based, all done, just what we're seeing in the markets. Let the markets tell the story. Dow futures are up 838 points. That's just 2%. And Contessa, dare I say this is random but interesting. This would be the biggest point gain for Dow futures, according to our amazing data team here, since December 13th, 2022, when they gained 967 points. If we keep going up, we could have the biggest futures gain and what could be a very big market and money day. Look at the small cap stocks, too. IWM is an ETF. There's a Russell 2000, what they call an E-mini. It's a futures contract that represents their, look at that. You say it and they just bring it up on the screen. It's fantastic. If you're on the radio, maybe driving around in Guam late afternoon.
Imagine it.
The Russell 2000 E-minis are up 4.3%. Now, I am not smart enough to know that where that stands in historical record of Russell E-mini gains, but my guess is it's pretty darn high.
Well, the Russell 2000 futures are seeing their highest level since November 22nd, 2021. So that, again, I had a little help from
You know what I think is going to be very interesting, Brian and Contessa? I'm very curious about the dollar. Donald Trump does not like a strong dollar. If you've read some of his interviews with other financial publications and outlets, he sounds very, very much like someone who would like to weaken the dollar. And I'm very curious as to what actually happens there. There are some members that surround him that actually want to tax foreign direct investment to try to dampen the strength of the dollar so that way we'll have stronger exports. I'm very curious to see what happens there.
And Contessa, you're so right. And one of the things that we were talking about with David Zervos was what actually happens to longer-term rates. Higher longer-term rates generally gives you a stronger dollar, at least from a flow point. So if those rates can come down, we don't have as strong a dollar.
And Mark Short, you're still there, Mark, right?
Yes,
correct?
sir.
Yeah, okay. So, Gary Cohn made this point. You were on set as well, top of the 7 o'clock Eastern Time coverage. And I thought it was just so smart because Cohn worked in the White House. And you guys know, Senator, you know this as well. Any of you D.C. types know this?
Do I have to admit, Gary?
Yes, you do.
Oh,
yes, you do. Because this is not a partisan.
He says you're smart.
Yes, he said the same.
We like each other.
Because, and comment please on this, as people you've run and won campaigns, Senator Heitkamp, what politicians say in their campaigns is not always what they're able to actually accomplish while they're in office. Breaking news, right, Mark Short, that Donald J. Trump, assuming he wins, we don't know, if he does win, puts together a cabinet, even with a Republican Senate, maybe a blue, a Democratic-controlled House, the stuff he says is not necessarily what he's going to be able to do. That's just politics. I don't care if your name is Trump, George Washington, or whomever, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, and it's not just based upon what the politics are. I think he himself has an amazing ability to be flexible on issues and change positions quickly. So absolutely not everything that's promised. But again, I think as we've said, is for the benefit of the economy. He has been clear in stating he wants to extend the tax relief. He has been clear about advancing a deregulatory agenda. And so I think those things the market can be assured of.
Yeah, I think that's right. But, let's kind of turn the page on, what we were talking about, the culture. So is he going to pardon all the January 6th defendants? Is he going to start deportations? What is he going to do that will be disruptive in terms of unifying the country? Or is he going to immediately go to an economic agenda that seems to be fairly popular with people? Or will these additional issues sidetrack him? And that's the other thing you need to be worried about. You talk about what's the priority. He is somebody who is not focused on priorities. It's just kind of the world of what's happening today, right? Mm-hmm. And so, we'll wait and see. But I think that the idea about grievance, the idea of curtailing the civil service system.
Petty revenge, right?
Yeah. And, if he puts all of that aside and focuses on...
Do you think he will?
No, I don't.
A lot of real concern about that, Senator.
Yeah. Well, and, we'll see. I mean, let's take a look at his speech. I think that will be a good indication of which direction he's going. I thought that his convention speech was going to be an opportunity to turn the page, say I'm a change man. About 10 minutes into it, he turned the page, but it wasn't I'm a change man. It went into all the grievance discussion once again.
You know, it's interesting, as we've been watching the returns roll in, we're also monitoring how business is reacting. You're seeing Tesla jumping in the overnight trading. Bitcoin hit a new record of more than 75,000. We've mentioned the futures. Michelle was mentioning the dollar strength here, as we've seen some other, especially it's been noticeable, the peso and Chinese currency falling. And overseas markets, the Asian markets are now open, and we've seen some strength there, but not Hong Kong. Michelle, you want to weigh in?
I haven't seen the Hong Kong markets, the overseas markets. I mean, you know, I think you'll see a general rally because we're not going to have uncertainty. I don't know how China will trade. That's a very closed market.
Michelle?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry to jump in on you, but as promised, the former president, Donald J. Trump, is making his way out to the podium. He's not there yet. Let's listen in.
From the plains of Minnesota to the hills of Tennessee, across the plains of Texas, from sea to shining sea, Detroit down to Houston, and New York to LA, where there's pride in every American heart, and it's time we stand and say,
Thank you very much. Wow. Well, I want to thank you all very much. This is great. These are our friends. We have thousands of friends in this incredible movement. This was a movement like nobody's ever seen before. And frankly, this was, I believe, the greatest political movement of all time. There's never been anything like this in this country, and maybe beyond. And now it's going to reach a new level of importance because we're going to help our country heal. We're going to help our country heal. We have a country that needs help, and it needs help very badly. We're going to fix our borders. We're going to fix everything about our country. And we made history, and the reason is going to be just that. We overcame obstacles that nobody thought possible, and it is now clear that we've achieved the most incredible political thing. Look what happened. Is this crazy? But it's a political victory that our country has never seen before, nothing like this. I want to thank the American people for the extraordinary honor of being elected your 47th president and your 45th president. And every citizen, I will fight for you, for your family, and your future. Every single day I will be fighting for you, and with every breath in my body, I will not rest until we have delivered the strong, safe, and prosperous America that our children deserve and that you deserve. This will truly be the golden age of America. That's what we have to have. This is a magnificent victory for the American people that will allow us to make America great again. And in addition to having won the battleground states of North Carolina, I love these places, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, we are now winning in Michigan, Arizona, Nevada, and Alaska, which would result in us carrying at least 315 electoral votes. But it's much easier doing what the networks did or whoever called it, because there was no other path. There was no other path to victory. We also have won the popular vote. That was great. Very proud of that. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Now, winning the popular vote was very nice, I will tell you. It's a great feeling of love. We have a great feeling of love in this very large room with unbelievable people standing by my side. These people have been incredible. They've made the journey with me, and we're going to make you very happy. We're going to make you very proud of your vote. I hope that you're going to be looking back someday and say that was one of the truly important moments of my life when I voted for this group of people beyond the president, this group of great people. America has given us an unprecedented and powerful mandate. We have taken back control of the Senate. Wow, that's good. And the Senate races in Montana, Nevada, Texas, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, were all won by the MAGA movement. They helped so much. And in those cases, every one of them, we worked with the senators. They were tough races. And I mean, the number of victories in the Senate was absolutely incredible. And we did tele-rallies. We did tele-rallies with each one of them. And sometimes we did 2 or 3 and it was amazing to look at all of those victories. Nobody expected that, nobody. So I just wanted to thank you very much for that. And you have some great senators and some great new senators. And it also looks like we'll be keeping control of the House of Representatives. And I want to thank Mike Johnson. I think he's doing a terrific job. Terrific job. I want to also thank my beautiful wife, Melania, First Lady. Who has the #1 best-selling book in the country. Can you believe that? Oh, no, she's done a great job, works very hard to help people. So I just want to thank her. But I want to thank my whole family, my amazing children, and they are amazing children. Now, we all think our children are amazing. Everybody here thinks their children are amazing, but that's a good thing when you think they are. But Don, Eric, Ivanka, Tiffany, Barron, Laura, Jared, Kimberly, Michael, thank you all. What a help. What a... My father-in-law, Victor, is tremendous, and we miss very much Melania's mother, Amalia. We miss Amalia, don't we, huh? She would be very happy right now, standing on this stage. She'd be so proud. She was a great woman, that one. Beautiful inside and out. She was a great woman. I want to be the first to congratulate our great, now I can say, Vice President-elect of the United States, J.D. Vance. And his absolutely remarkable and beautiful wife, Usha Vance. And he's a feisty guy, isn't he? You know, I've said, go into the enemy camp, and you know the enemy camp is certain networks, and a lot of people don't like to, sir, do I have to do that? He just goes, okay, which one, CNN, MSDNC? He'll say, all right, thank you very much. He actually looks fine. He's like the only guy I've ever seen, he really looks forward to it, and then he just goes and absolutely obliterates them. Say a couple of words here.
Wild. Well, Mr. President, I appreciate you allowing me to join you on this incredible journey. I thank you for the trust that you placed in me. And I think that we just witnessed the greatest political comeback in the history of the United States of America. And under President Trump's leadership, we're never going to stop fighting for you, for your dreams, for the future of your children. And after the greatest political comeback in American history, we're going to lead the greatest economic comeback in American history under Donald Trump's leadership.
Thank you very much. He's turned out to be a good choice. I took a little heat at the beginning, but he was, I knew the brain was a good one, about as good as it gets. And we love the family, and we're going to have a great 4 years, and we're going to turn our country around, make it something very special. It lost that little thing called special. We have to make it so. We're going to make this so great. It's the greatest country and potentially the greatest country in the world by far. And right now we're going to just work very hard to get all of that back. We're going to make it the best it's ever been. We can do that. If we had to wait longer, I don't know. It was going bad, and it was going bad fast. We're going to have to seal up those borders, and we're going to have to let people come into our country. We want people to come back in, but we have to let them come back in, but they have to come in legally. They have to come in legally. Let me also express my tremendous appreciation for Susie and Chris, the job you did. Susie, come, Susie, come here. Come here, Susie. Chris, come here, Chris. Susie likes to stay sort of in the back, let me tell you. The Ice Maiden, we call her the Ice Maiden. Come here, Chris. Come here, Chris. Susie likes to stay in the background. She's not in the background. Come here, say something.
This wasn't expected, but I just want to thank, obviously, President Trump for this journey. It was a great one, and he's a hell of a candidate, and he's going to be a hell of a great 47th president. And this team that we had, the best team, and, of course, even my boss, Susie Wiles, the best. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Susie. Look at this. I've never seen her be shot before. Susie. They're great. Everybody up here is great. Everybody up here is very special. But the Trump, who did you say? Oh, let me tell you, we have a new star. A star is born, Elon. Now he is. Now he's an amazing guy. We were sitting together tonight. You know, he spent 2 weeks in Philadelphia and different parts of Pennsylvania campaigning. You know, he sent the rocket up 2 weeks ago, and I saw that rocket, and I saw it coming down. I saw it. It was, when it left, it was beautiful, shiny white. When it came down, it didn't look so pretty. It was going 10,000 miles an hour, and it was burning like hell. I said, what happened to your paint job? He said, we've never made a paint that could withstand that kind of heat. And, but I saw it come down and turn around. And it was, you know, it's like 22 stories tall, by the way. It looks a little smaller than that, but it's big. And it came down, and you saw all that fire burning. And I'm saying, only Elon can do this. It must be an Elon. And I tell the story. I told it last night. I had a man on the phone. I had the screen muted, no sound. I was talking to a very important man, happens to be here. And that very important guy, one of the most important people in, I would say, the country, actually. But, you know, I was president, and now it looks like I was going to be maybe president again, so I figured I could ask him to hold. So I asked him to hold. And because, especially because you're going to be president again, they hold. So I took the phone down, and I'm looking at the screen. I'm seeing this crazy thing that's going around and coming down. It looks like it's going to crash into the gantry. And I said, oh, no. And I said, do me a favor, do you mind holding for a couple of minutes? I want to see this. I thought it was a space-age movie or something. I put the phone down. Bad part, I didn't pick it up for 45 minutes, and he was holding. But this spaceship came down, and I saw those engines firing, and it looked like it was over. It was going to smash, and then I saw the fire pour out from the left side, and I put it straight, and it came down so gently, and then it wrapped those arms around it, and it held it, and just like you hold your baby at night, your little baby. And it was a beautiful thing to see, and I called Elon. I said, Elon, was that you? He said, yes, it was. I said, who else can do that? Can Russia do it? No. Can China do it? No. Can the United States do it other than you? No. Nobody can do that. I said, that's why I love you, Elon. That's great. And you know, when we had the tragic Hurricane Helene, and it hit North Carolina, they were really devastated, the water. This was a big water, as big as we've ever seen, water hurricane. It built lakes out of nothing. Fields became lakes, and the danger was unbelievable. And the people from North Carolina came to me and they said, would it be possible, at all possible, for you to speak to Elon Musk? We need Starlink. I said, what's Starlink? It's a form of communication. So I called Elon, and I'll tell you what, he had, and it was very dangerous. People would die. They had no communication. All the wires were down. I called Elon Musk. I said, Elon, you have something called Starlink. Is that right? Yes, I do. What the hell is it? He said, it's a communication system that's very good. I said, Elon, they need it really, really badly in North Carolina. Can you get it? He had that there so fast. It was incredible. So, and it was great. It saved a lot of lives. He saved a lot of lives. But he's a character. He's a special guy. He's a super genius. We have to protect our geniuses. We don't have that many of them. We have to protect our super geniuses. I want to thank some of the guys. You know, we have up here today the U.S. Open champion. He's a fantastic golfer. He's slightly longer than me. It's a little bit longer than me. Just a little bit. Bryson DeChambeau is up here someplace. What happened to Bryson? Where is he? Bryson. Oh, he was shot. He's hitting balls. Oh, he's on the way. He's hitting balls. Bryson. Oh, look at him. He's got a great career going. Great U.S. Open, Bryson. That's a fantastic job. And we also have a man, Dana White, who has done some job. He's a tough guy. So Dana started UFC and came to me, do you mind if I use your, nobody wanted to give him Marines because they said it's a rough sport, a little rough. And I helped him out a little bit, and I went, and they said, this is the roughest sport I've ever seen, but I began to like it, and he loved it, and nobody's done a better job in sports. And you know, he's a very motivational kind of a guy, what he does. He gets these fighters, and they really go at it, and it's become one of the most successful sports enterprises anywhere at any time. It's doing so well. I'd like to ask Dana just to say a couple of words because people love to hear from him. Dana, please.
Nobody deserves this more than him, and nobody deserves this more than his family does. This is what happens when the machine comes after you. What you've seen over the last several years, this is what it looks like. Couldn't stop him. He keeps going forward. He doesn't quit. He's the most resilient, hard-working man I've ever met in my life. His family are incredible people. This is karma, ladies and gentlemen. He deserves this. They deserve it as a family. I want to thank some people real quick. I want to thank the Nelk boys, Aiden Ross, Theo Vaughn, busting with the boys, and last but not least, the mighty and powerful Joe Rogan. And thank you, America. Thank you. Have a good night.
That is a piece of work. Now he's really an amazing guy. But most of all, I want to thank the millions of hardworking Americans across the nation who have always been the heart and soul of this really great movement. We've been through so much together, and today you showed up in record numbers to deliver a victory like really, probably like no other. This was something special, and we're gonna pay you back. We're gonna do the best job. We're gonna turn it around. It's got to be turned around. It's got to be turned around fast, and we're gonna turn it around. We're gonna do it in every way, with so many ways, but we're gonna do it in every way. This will forever be remembered as the day the American people regained control of their country. So I just want to say that on behalf of this great group of people, these are hard-working people. These are fantastic people, and we can add a few names like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He came and he's going to help make America healthy again. And now he's a great guy, and he really means it. He wants to do some things, and we're going to let him go to it. I just said, but Bobby, leave the oil to me. We have more liquid gold, oil and gas. We have more liquid gold than any country in the world, more than Saudi Arabia. We have more than Russia. Bobby, stay away from the liquid gold. Other than that, go have a good time, Bobby. We're going to be paying down debt. We're going to be reducing taxes. We can do things that nobody else can do. Nobody else is going to be able to do it. China doesn't have what we have. Nobody has what we have. But we have the greatest people also. Maybe that's the most important thing. This campaign has been so historic in so many ways. We've built the biggest, the broadest, the most unified coalition. They've never seen anything like it in all of American history. They've never seen it. Young and old, men and women, rural and urban. And we had them all helping us tonight. When you think, I mean, I was looking at it, I was watching it. They had some great analysis of the people that voted for us. Nobody's ever seen anything like that. They came from all corners, union, non-union, African American, Hispanic American, Asian American, Arab American, Muslim American. We had everybody, and it was beautiful. It was a historic realignment, uniting citizens of all backgrounds around a common core of common sense. You know, we're the party of common sense. We want to have borders. We want to have security. We want to have things be good, safe. We want great education. We want a strong and powerful military, and ideally we don't have to use it. You know, we had no wars. 4 years we had no wars, except we defeated ISIS. We defeated ISIS in record time. But we had no wars. They said, he will start a war. I'm not going to start a war. I'm going to stop wars. But this is also a massive victory for democracy and for freedom. Together, we're going to unlock America's glorious destiny. We're going to achieve the most incredible future for our people. Yesterday, as I stood at my last stop on the campaign trail, I'll never be doing a rally again. Can you believe it? I think we've done 900 rallies approximately from them. Can you imagine? 900, 901, something, a lot of rallies. And it was sad. Everybody was sad. Many people, I said, this is our last rally. But now we're going on to something that's far more important, because the rallies were used for us to be put in this position where we can really help our country. That's what we're going to do. We're going to make our country better than it ever has been. And I said that many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason. And that reason was to save our country and to restore America to greatness. And now we are going to fulfill that mission together. We're going to fulfill that mission. The task before us will not be easy, but I will bring every ounce of energy, spirit, and fight that I have in my soul to the job that you've entrusted to me. This is a great job. There's no job like this. This is the most important job in the world. Just as I did in my first term, we had a great first term, a great first term. I will govern by a simple motto: promises made, promises kept. We're going to keep our promises. Nothing will stop me from keeping my word to you, the people. We will make America safe, strong, prosperous, powerful, and free again. And I'm asking every citizen all across our land to join me in this noble and righteous endeavor. That's what it is. It's time to put the divisions of the past 4 years behind us. It's time to unite. And we're going to try, we have to try, and it's going to happen. Success will bring us together. I've seen that. I saw that in the first term. When we became more and more successful, people started coming together. Success is going to bring us together, and we are going to start by all putting America first. We have to put our country first for at least a period of time. We have to fix it. Because together we can truly make America great again for all Americans. So I want to just tell you what a great honor this is. I want to thank you. I will not let you down. America's future will be bigger, better, bolder, richer, safer, and stronger than it has ever been before. God bless you, and God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Okay, there you're hearing Donald Trump just finishing up in West Palm Beach, Florida. A night he was claiming his victory, and there you're seeing that the crowd loved it. But I should say that NBC News has not projected a win for Donald Trump right now. NBC News Decision Desk has 204 electoral votes for Kamala Harris and 266 for Donald Trump. With me here on the set for Your Vote, Your Money is Michelle Caruso Cabrera, CNBC contributor, and of course our former colleague, former Senator Heidi Heitkamp, also a CNBC contributor, and Jay Clayton, who is a former SEC chair and a CNBC contributor. David Zervos also is with us with Jefferies. Let's get a start first, Jay. Give me a sense of, I should just say it was remarkable listening to Donald Trump claiming victory, saying that it was the greatest political movement of all time, and then promising to help the country heal, saying that he's united with all Americans, saying that he would see success bringing people together, that he's going to put the divisions of the past 4 years behind him. He really notably set aside his vehemence and some of his grievances that we've heard over and over again on the campaign trail against political opponents, against those who had served with him under his former administration, and heard him talking about what he wants to do. Right away, it was fix the borders. He talked about taking back control of the Senate and the things that he was going to be able to do there. He also really praised Elon Musk, said a new star here, A Star is Born, and said that he spent some time campaigning with Elon Musk. There you're seeing Minnesota now as NBC projects Kamala Harris as the winner in Minnesota. This is one of the states here in the Midwest. Wisconsin and Michigan have not been called for Kamala Harris. Those were considered part of that blue wall that she needed in order to win. We're waiting on those. All right. So, Jay, let me get back to you now. Donald Trump really seemed to turn a page in his playbook.
Well, let me respond to two things that you said. The first is, this is his last election. He's not going to be campaigning again. We heard him be a little bit nostalgic about his last rally and the fact that, so he is going to move forward and he's going to be concerned about his legacy and whether he's delivering. Elon Musk. What do we know about Elon Musk? No matter what you're going to say about him, he delivers. I mean, he has restored the U.S. space program. We did.
Also, I'm sorry to interrupt. New Jersey as well. NBC now is projecting that Kamala Harris has won New Jersey's 14 electoral votes. It was very close. Go ahead, Jay.
So what does Donald Trump want to do? He does want to deliver on those things because this is his last hurrah. He's not running for president again. He's not going to run for another office. And Elon Musk is a can-do person. That's a nice message to start this evening.
Senator Heitkamp, when we're looking at the way this is shaken out across the nation, not only do you have Donald Trump projecting victory, even though NBC News has not called that yet, and we're starting to see states now coming in with electoral votes for Kamala Harris, but you are seeing that the Senate, NBC has projected the Senate control now goes to Republicans. How do Democrats continue to advance their particular goals and their missions, and at the same time figure out how do they do better the next time?
I mean, I think that they come to him and say, okay, you won. Let's talk about what you want to do with border security, but let's talk about immigration reform. I mean, I sat at a table, a lunch table, with Donald Trump, and we all got a chance to say what we wanted to do. And Joe Manchin said, we passed an immigration reform bill that basically almost got 70 votes in the Senate, and the president at the time, Trump, said, I want to see it. And I remember, Grassley picks up his head and says, oh, that's amnesty, and that kind of ended the discussion. But I think that as somebody who really understands that you can't deport, I mean, I hope he understands, you can't deport the number of people. We've got to get people to work. The demographics in our country are not working for us. And that this is a real opportunity, I think. If I were in the Senate, I'd say, okay, you want to get all these things done, permitting reform, you want to get regulatory reform done. How about we also talk about what's on our agenda and cut a deal? And we can't have complained as Democrats about the last 4 years of Republican obstruction and then lead with obstruction. I mean, I just don't think that that's the mood of the country. If the Democrats are going to turn the page, they need to be principled in what they're going to oppose, not just oppose the president, that, which it looks like it's going to be Donald Trump, but they also need to come with their agenda. And I think that's the best way to move forward.
I want to look at some of the market reaction that we've seen as the results have been coming in tonight. Dow futures have crossed 850 at one point. They're coming back down a little bit, but still above 800. The S&P as well up 1.5% on the futures. The NASDAQ futures up 1.5%. Michelle, it looks like there's a lot of optimism about what new leadership could mean, but Jay was making the point earlier about what certainty means.
For sure. Remember, the planning for this night, if we can show people the wires, was we had assumed we would not know the answer tonight. We had assumed we may not know the answer for a week. It could be a month. What if there were lawsuits, right? I mean, there was a lot of planning out there about how long this could go on. Well, lo and behold, it looks like we may have a decisive outcome tonight.
We still have 2 close-to-call states. There is a path to victory for Kamala Harris should she win those states, although we're looking at the returns, and as they start to get 50, 60, 70% of the returns come in, that looks more difficult. But again, NBC News right now has not projected Donald Trump as the victor, though he has proclaimed it himself.
That's true. And clearly, I think the market is reacting and not waiting for an absolute declaration by any of the networks. That's what you're seeing price in. I think, one, it's just the certainty of the outcome. I think it's also that he wants to do more deregulation. He doesn't want to raise taxes. He wants to cut taxes. Those are all very good things for the markets. I think the things that are uncertain is what is trade policy really going to look like? Is he talking about the levels of tariffs that he's been talking about as a negotiation tactic, or is that something that he really believes in?
This brings up something we haven't talked about yet. Who's governing the country until January 21st? Right now, we know we have Joe Biden as president, but we also know that Joe Biden was not robust enough to run for a second term. We have Kamala Harris, who was defeated tonight. Who is running the country and setting policy? Because the markets are already assuming we have a Trump presidency. What do we have between now and then? It's a very interesting question. I mean, Heidi?
I think you have a rush to confirm a lot of judges is what you have, because obviously there's judges in the pipeline. And I think that you're going to see the must-do kinds of things. Doesn't mean we get a farm bill. Doesn't mean that we get, we only did an extension through December. And what does that mean? Especially if the House goes Democratic, then there's also that leverage, like what more can you do? So I think it's going to be a period of negotiation. I think President Biden is more than able to sit at a negotiation table and kind of finish it out.
Well, to Michelle's point on trade policy, when does trade policy start?
Trade policy starts when Trump becomes president, I think. And I think Michelle, you made such great points about the USMC. I had forgotten that the renegotiation, I think, what Trump didn't like about NAFTA was the lack of renegotiation. And this was set 5 years?
Yes, every 5 years. So they're going to start next year.
And that's a big deal, given what's happened electorally in Mexico.
Because three-quarters of the country has said they didn't like the way that America was heading. And one of the things that has been notable is the failure of the vice president to win the hearts and minds of minorities, men, and young people. Let's bring in Cyrus Beschloss, CEO of Generation Labs. I wanted to know one thing that I was seeing out of Nevada early today is that they were saying that there were a lot of ballots that had been tossed in Nevada because signatures were not matching up with IDs. Well, it was pointed out that a lot of young people don't really have signatures. They have scribbles. Now, Cyrus, when you're looking at the way this election is playing out for young voters, what stands out in your mind about the effect that they had, who they were supporting, and the way things may change in the future to accommodate young voters?
Yeah, no, it's my job to survey young people. That's literally all I do. I would love to sit here and say that young people were, a kingmaker, that they really helped shape this election. I don't think we can say that. In 2016, percentage of young people 18 through 29 that voted is 39%. In 2020, the percentage that voted was 50%, and people were popping champagne about that. And then you realize that that was 16% lower than the rest of the American public. 2024, I think we're going to see a turnout somewhere in between 2016 and 2020, and I know Democrats don't need a...
Why do you think that young voters are not that interested?
It's a great question. The biggest thing that we saw in the polling that was different from what we saw playing out more in the news cycle was that I think a lot of the conventional wisdom, a lot of smart people thought that in order to get young people on board, the discussion had to be led by things like the Middle East conflict, Gaza. In our polling, we found that, you're going to find this to be a shock, the number one issue to young people that's going to determine their vote, that probably did determine their vote tonight, is the economy. And so what we're seeing so far in the exit polls is that President Biden in 2020, he won young people by 24 points. What we're seeing so far is that it looks like Kamala Harris did carry young people, but more like 10, 12 points.
When you say young people care about the economy,
right?
What is it that they care about? Do they care about, I mean, because they saw a lot of student loan forgiveness under the Biden administration. Wages went up under the Biden administration. Inflation went up under the Biden administration. It started under the Trump administration, but continued. Talk a little bit about the actual issues that young voters are thinking about when they're thinking about their pocketbooks, because this is going to matter to businesses across America, too. What's important to young voters when it comes to elections matters to their bosses, too.
Absolutely. And so then when I think about the two metrics that are sort of the biggest jewels in the economy that President Biden and Kamala Harris like to point to, number one was the employment rate. The fact that we had such low unemployment. Young people, though, they aren't making enough to get by. In our surveys with CNBC that we were lucky to do, we found that young people, for the most part, were saying that they either live paycheck to paycheck or something close to it. If that's the case, then I don't care if you have a job, you're not feeling good about what that job's getting you. And then the second thing, in terms of good things in the economy, is the stock market. Stock market's been absolutely crashing records, but if you're living paycheck to paycheck, very low likelihood that you're participating in the stock market.
This is a great point. This is something that a lot of the, what I'd say, macro data really didn't pick up on. There's big segments of America that don't yet own a home, still have to pay for college, and have no exposure to assets. This economy has served those people very, very poorly.
Right.
Yeah. Homes are less affordable, college costs more, and you didn't get any benefits from stock market appreciation.
And Diana Olick's pieces all day long today. Did you see her pieces about the real estate market and how, 4 years ago, whether it was easier to buy or rent, and now it's become nearly impossible to buy. The inflation that has hit young people is they're terrified they're never going to be able to buy a house.
And I've said for a while, and I've tweeted out that I get that, just again, not my opinion, what I feel when I talk to people. There's two people. It's not red-blue. There's asset owners, Jay, and there's asset renters in America. If you are an asset owner, if you own stocks, if you own a house, if you own a business, things are good for you. You've probably gotten richer. Markets at record highs. We talk about that every day on CNBC. But if you're an asset renter, you're renting a home, you own no stocks, you live paycheck to paycheck, things, to your point, Jay, have been harder. Cyrus, it's Brian. I want to ask you one question. It's got to put you on the spot here. Is the Biden administration was very active in trying to cancel student loan debt. And they got it. They did a lot. There's still some stuff they couldn't do. But overall, it was an aggressive play. Now, to be fair, most student loan debt is actually held by people my age, not by people your age. But it is an urgent issue with the young voter. Why do you think this didn't seem to resonate more?
It's a question of how much you can actually do in terms of forgiving student loan debt. Not to minimize the fact that makes a difference in people's lives, but if some of the other pieces that we're talking about, both in terms of wages and wage growth and in terms of sort of underemployment, great that student loans are getting pushed off the table somewhat or even all the way in some cases, but like we're talking about, you look at the whole economic picture, and if they can't participate in the economy, and last thing I should say, in terms of the student loans, we talk about connecting that type of benefit to the person that actually provided it. Trump has done a heck of a job in terms of putting his name on checks. I don't know if that was necessarily the case with the Biden administration.
Cyrus, thank you so much for joining us and giving us your perspective from all of that polling you've done with the young voters out there. Appreciate that. Cyrus Beschloss.
All right, it is 3:08 a.m. on the East Coast. It is whatever time it is in Hawaii. By the way, thanks for joining us. We are live here at CNBC HQ. Much more coverage of Election Night, America, stock futures, Absolutely ripping. We are glad you're with us, and we're back right after this.
Hello, I'm Karen Cho. We are taking you away from U.S. programming for a check now on how markets are reacting to the U.S. election. European markets have just popped open, and don't forget there's been a view that there could be some caution to any Trump victory. NBC not projecting a winner yet, even though we have seen Trump declare victory at his watch night party in West Palm Beach, Florida. So what we've got in terms of market reaction early on, investors piling back into European stocks. The Stoxx Europe 600 has been cautious all trading week ahead of the election, now rallying 1.2%. So very strong gains, and you can see at the index level, this is translated to gains for the FTSE 100 here in the UK, 0.9% in the green. Similar size bounce for the German stock market. France pulling ahead even more, 1.1% to the upside, and stocks out of Italy rallying 0.6% plus. So definitive across the board. These markets are in the green and very much tracking the early hours that you are seeing for those U.S. markets that are now perched for their biggest gains since November 2022 on the Dow. Let me take you to the sectors. Some clear winners and losers even at this early stage while we wait for more definitive results. And you can see healthcare names, they are rallying 2.7%. This is the view in the market that perhaps Trump could lead to less onerous healthcare regulation, that you could see more pulling back of regulation. Healthcare names very much a winner this morning. Same to banks and financial services. They are showing sizable gains, 2.4% to the upside. Media, does any Trump victory here suggest that we're talking about more advertising, more eyeballs? Media stocks very much gaining. That is a very strong move to the upside. Travel and leisure, a risk-on trade too, seen high by 2.2%. To me, what is fascinating is the losers this morning. We've seen over the course of the week that this poll over the weekend that suggested maybe Harris's chances were stronger than what's translating today on Election Day. What we've seen is that the clean energy sector had been showing some repositioning. There's a clear loser today. Autos as well, and this is the concerns that perhaps we're talking about more trade tariffs and perhaps more regulation that is around border protection of cars. So autos in Europe losing steam. Volvo Cars, Mercedes, some of the clear losers today. Utilities, that is the green energy story that is now being faded in Europe very early on this morning, down 1.3+%. Oil and gas too. Drill, baby, drill. Does that mean more supply impacting the sector? Resources flatlining there. So you can see very mixed picture for the winners and losers at this early hour in Europe. That's all from us for now. I'm going to hand you back to our colleagues stateside.
We overcame obstacles that nobody thought possible, and we overcame obstacles that nobody thought possible, and it is now clear that we've achieved the most incredible political thing. Look what happened. Is this crazy?
Donald Trump just moments ago in West Palm Beach, Florida, where he gave a victory speech, although NBC News has not called a victory for Donald Trump. Kamala Harris continues to gain some electoral votes. It now stands Kamala Harris at 219, Trump at 266. So we're waiting for that call to come from NBC News.
Yes, we are. Only takes one more state, but that call has not been made by NBC. All right, so with that said, let's get you caught up with where things stand in the race right now. And we are 270 to win. You get 270 electoral votes. You win. So if Donald Trump were to win one of Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, Arizona, he would indeed become the next president of the United States. That has not occurred yet. It's very important to remember that no matter what the former president may say in a speech or not. By the way, the markets are ripping on this news. That's why we're here. We do the markets, and that's how we're approaching everything. Dow futures, small caps,
Look at
they're
the
soaring.
implied Dow opener right now up 922 points. Let's take a look at the battleground scorecard right now. There you're seeing those that are too close to call. The important battleground states of Michigan and Wisconsin, too close to call. Nevada and Arizona. Arizona, the last time I looked, the only about 50% of the ballots were in at this point. Pennsylvania, though, goes to Trump with 50.8% of the vote there. And we know that he got North Carolina as well, Wisconsin, 51.2%, but still NBC News says that one is too close to call. Again, Harris's 47.2% of the vote.
Which is about 120,000 votes with 93% of the vote in. So while nobody is calling it, NBC News has not called it, therefore we will not call it, because we wouldn't do that.
Right. Let's get a check on global markets right this hour, shall we? Let's start with U.S. stock futures. We were talking, Brian's word, ripping. There you're seeing the NASDAQ futures up 1.5%, Dow Jones futures up more than 2%, the S&P 500 up 1.8%. The Russell 2000, these are the small cap stocks right now. Oh, that's the S&P up 1.85%. There we go. The Russell 2000 up more than 5%.
I think that's a rip. I think it's fair to call. Jay Clayton, as the former SEC chair, would you consider a 5% move in small cap futures a, quote, rip?
That's not a misstatement.
Thank you. It's 3:15 in the morning when we're getting a little punchy on coffee here.
Bitcoin as well. We saw Bitcoin set a new record earlier today. Right now it stands at $73,303. It has pulled back somewhat, but still up 5.5%.
Now, there's individual equities that are on the move as well. How do we know this? Okay, well, there are many platforms out there that do 24/7 consecutive trading. Robinhood, for example, on the trading platform Blue Ocean, they've got good volume. So we're showing you stocks. These are live trades. These are companies that also have enough volume. This is not a couple hundred odd lot trades. These stocks have real volume. Tesla right now, which because of the Musk-Trump bromance, Trump was praising Elon Musk and Starlink in his talk, up nearly 3%. Contessa talked about Bitcoin hitting 73,000, a little off its high, but still Coinbase Global up 3%. Trump Media is up 10%, but it's coming off already huge gains. It's pulled back well from its highs as well. And Constellation Energy, why are we showing you that? Well, the other day, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission whacked a deal where Talon Energy, which is a nuclear company, would sell energy to Amazon. And so there's this thought that under a Trump administration, they might be a little bit more pro-energy, pro-deregulation, maybe pro-nuclear, even though the Biden White House has been fairly pro-nuclear in words lately, that a company called like Constellation, which owns 3 Mile Island, now renamed the Crane Energy Center,
fantastic information,
would indeed be able to be restarted with a deal on Microsoft. The energy trade there lives on.
As we go through this election morning, because we're in the AM hours, still with us is former SEC Commissioner Jay Clayton, MCC Production CEO Michelle Caruso Cabrera, Jefferies Chief Market Strategist David Zurzos. And joining the conversation is Yale School of Management Senior Associate Dean Jeff Sonnenfeld. It's great to have you all here today. Jeff, because you're the new voice at the table, give me a sense of where we are right now and what this, I mean, you wrote an incredible op-ed with a lot of former CEOs, and then what we're seeing seems to indicate there's a lot of fervor and passion for the former president.
You're absolutely right. There is a gap there. We haven't had a Republican candidate for the presidency that's ever had so little support from the leaders of the major corporations in the country. Usually half of every, about half of the major CEOs in the country have supported the GOP candidate going back a century, whether or not we're looking at Taft or Reagan or Nixon or John McCain or...
Jeff, do you think that's because they don't support the Donald Trump policies? Because that's not really what I've been hearing. Or because they have sensitivities either with their employees or their customers about being political and the divisions we've had in this country?
I tell you, Jay, it has not anything whatsoever to do with being woke. And there's an implication for what they do now going forward because of what does bother them. That's true that they are not xenophobic. And I think the very magnanimous words we heard from Donald Trump moments ago, former President Trump, are encouraging that maybe he'll move to the center. I thought he would have done that in 2016. I've known Donald Trump for several decades. And I was surprised he took the dark turn that he did before. And maybe he'll capture that middle ground now. But they're not xenophobic. Half of the Fortune 500, Jay, half of them are led either by immigrants or first generation. Of tech companies that are worth over $1 billion in valuation, a third of them are created by immigrants. They're creating tens of millions of jobs. So to be calling them vermin and everything else and poisoning the bloodstream of the country.
But he did, he definitely did not do that in his speech tonight.
No.
Tonight he was very clear that he plans to unite the country and forget about the grievances of the past 4 years. He said that very clearly.
I think that's great and that's right. So maybe that's encouraging.
I think an anchor of a Donald Trump economic plan will be smart immigration for exactly the reason
it should be. It should be. What we had to do is, I'll let you in on a secret. In 2019, we couldn't get around Stephen Miller. Just to give you a little secret, I had to go to Jared Kushner with the Business Roundtable. I'm tempted to even name names of who the commission was, the Business Roundtable, to try to stop the block on the H-1B visa program for high-end talent, not to mention, who our construction workers are and who our agriculture workers are.
Let's all agree that if we're educating someone in this country, getting a graduate degree in the STEM area or something like that, that we ought to be able to retain them.
We should. That wasn't where Stephen Miller is and was, and I think if we can work around that, Jay, that would make a big difference. There were some in the administration who helped resolve that, but it was very difficult brinksmanship. Secondly, they are not protectionist and they're not isolationist. That's going to matter a lot. If we see President Putin swarm in further into Ukraine, putting in peril the rest of Eastern and Central Europe, NATO countries, and triggers a war, that's a world war, that's going to be pretty bad. So we have a problem with the isolationism.
I do know from dealing with corporations that most everybody is free trade, except when they look at their market and they realize that you need reciprocal trade in your own market. And
we need some, but just
all right,
when he
gentlemen,
says...
I'm going to interrupt right here. Joining us now is Allianz Chief Economic Advisor, Mohamed Al-Erian, who joins me now. It's great of you to join us, and thank you so much for your time. Given what we've seen, that the Senate control NBC News projects is going to Republicans, that it looks like Donald Trump is on a roll. He has claimed victory tonight already in a speech. NBC News has not yet called it. But, Mohamed, what should be priority number one if there's a new administration and new leadership in the Senate?
So while NBC News hasn't called it, the market has called it. And the market has called not just a Trump win, but a down ballot impact that's going to see a sweep in the houses of Congress. And they're also looking not just a political win, but an economic win. And that's what the market is telling you. So what are they seeing? They're seeing pro-growth policies led by deregulation. They are worried about tariffs, and you see that in the way different segments are reacting. They are worried about the deficit, and you see this in what has happened to 10-year yields, but they're excited about energy. And you see that in oil prices coming down. They're excited about greater supply of energy. So the market is positioning for higher growth, higher productivity, with concerns about budgetary implications and with concern about inflation.
How worried, Mohammed, should China be? Because we hear about these tariffs. We'll see if they happen. Again, candidates for the history of time have promised things or said things that did not happen. We already have tariffs on China. Trump has threatened to increase those tariffs. A, do you believe that will happen? And B, if it does, what will be the downstream effect on inflation or consumer sales or corporate sales?
So I believe that there will be some increase in tariffs. Won't be as big as what the president has indicated in some of his speeches. I think tariffs act as a pressure point for lots of countries around the world. In the case of China, they act as a pressure point for China to live up to its global responsibilities. I think most people agree that China has not lived up to its global economic responsibilities. So yes, you will see quite a lot being threatened. It will have an impact on inflation. But then the question will become, how big is the disinflationary impact of the higher growth, higher productivity measures? And the market right now is excited about the prospect for higher growth and higher productivity, but worried about the prospects for inflation.
Mohammed, on that and your discussion of the upward pressure on rates, particularly out at the longer term, what advice do you give a Trump administration that it'll be deregulatory, that'll be, what I would say is more permissive around permitting and energy? What do you give them on how to manage the balance sheet?
Jay, I put out an article in the FT yesterday saying that whoever wins has to come in and do 5 things in order to be able to deliver on their promises, let alone the well-being of the country. One is continue to promote economic growth. I don't think President Trump will have any issue with that. 2 is to get our arms around debt and deficit. And that's going to be really important because we're losing flexibility in the budget every single day, which makes it harder. 3, restrain your inclination to use your favorite tool too much. In the case of Harris, it would have been industrial policy and government intervention. In the case of President Trump, it is tariffs. So yes, use it, but not too much.
By the way, I just from a market perspective, Mohammed, sorry to jump in on you. We're seeing Dow futures up nearly 1,000. Not there yet, up about 950. We're seeing small cap futures vis-a-vis the Russell E-minis up 5%. Now, I don't know what the historical, if that's the best in X number of years. I can assure you I have not seen small caps up this much, I think, since when we first started to come out of COVID. Tesla is up 12% right now. It's up slightly more in the European trade. Are the markets, and I know you're a markets guy, you would say markets do what they want because it's a collective knowledge and wisdom of everybody else. But do you believe with these moves, particularly in the bond market, stocks, et cetera, that the market is getting a little too in front of itself in any way?
Not as yet, because of what Jay said earlier. There was a big question. Would you get a unity speech out of President Trump, or would you get a carnage speech out of President Trump? And what you got is a unity speech. And the market remembers what happened at around 2 in the morning back in 2016 when futures were down hard. He came out and gave a unity speech. And that turned futures around and set a tone that served the market well. So what the market is basically saying is, I've seen this movie before. The unity speech is a good thing, and they are reacting to that. So no, Brian, I think that when we look back, it will be the market simply has seen this movie before and wants to preempt what it saw last time.
Mohammed, Michelle here. We're showing the 1 week of the 10-year yield. And it's spiking today. I mean, it's making a very definitive move. What's your prediction there? And doesn't that end up being a natural governor on spending? I mean, we go back to when, James Carville had to say, wait, I got to listen to a bunch of bond market guys about how much I'm going to be able to spend. I mean, are we going to get there with what we're seeing here?
So we've seen around the world in advanced countries, we've always seen it in developing countries, but in advanced countries, the return of the so-called bond vigilante. The UK felt it in 2022. France has felt it. The UK is feeling it a little bit again now. But the US is exceptional, as you know, Michelle. So it doesn't force fiscal adjustment. It just influences fiscal adjustment.
Yeah.
The bond market in the US cannot impose outcomes. It can influence outcome. In the rest of the world, it imposes outcomes. So I think it's a message when you see the 10-year at 440, it's a message to the incoming administration. Keep an eye on debt and deficit. They matter. Keep an eye on the operational flexibility of the budget. That matters as well.
David Zervos, you've been incredibly patient. Thank you very much for and I'm sure you're champing at the bit. It's not chomping, by the way. It is champing at the bit to jump in here. Anything you would disagree with what Mohammed just said? And yes, also debts and deficits may matter, but history is littered with politicians who said they mattered, and then when they go tell their constituents that they might have to cut something, it doesn't matter all of a sudden.
Well, I think 2 things. One, I would say that the yield move so far is actually probably the most surprising thing to me, and I would imagine is surprising to many of our clients at Jefferies. I think a lot of folks thought a Trump win would cause long-term yields to go up much more than about 10 basis points, which is basically what they've done, 430 to 440. That's not a particularly large move in the grand scheme of things. Now, it could be that Trump was priced in a little more aggressively, and that's why it is. But that's not some sort of rabid inflation risk that's coming into the system, or some sort of rabid worry about sustainable debts and deficits. That's kind of a pretty normal, it's a big move, but it's a pretty normal big move. It's nothing unusual, nothing like what you're seeing in the IWM, for example, at 5%, or even in the dollar, which has had a much bigger move relative to its normal volatility. So I think that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is I think we're really underestimating one very important thing in all of this. And it comes from the Elon Musk discussion about cutting government spending and cutting government overreach. It gets back to our deregulation discussion earlier. But if this administration is serious about cutting back on spending, the biggest effect will be that we stop crowding out the private sector and we let the private sector do what it does best, which is gain control of the production and the GDP in the economy. The biggest problem with a big debt and deficit is that we get a big government. And the biggest problem with a big government is that we get a crowding out of the private sector. Just look at Japan. Japan is the classic example of a massive federal government that has crowded out an actually amazing private sector that really has been asleep for 3 decades. So I'm just going to say, if Elon is really serious about coming in and doing what he said, and Trump gives him that mandate, that is hugely positive for the U.S., it's hugely positive for growth, and it's very disinflationary.
I thought one of the most realistic things that Elon has said around this was severance.
Yeah.
We know we have a what I would say is an entrenched civil service, many of them quality people, but I think we're going to need to give them severance in order to reduce the what do you think the market would say?
I think the market would love it. I think the market is going to love the idea of cost cutting in Washington, D.C. They're going to love it. And I don't look, Jay, you've been in there. You know how hard it is. I've been at the Federal Reserve, spent 4 years of my career there on and off. But it's hard to move these things. But if there's a tag team that can kind of get this done, I would say Donald Trump and Elon Musk are probably two of the people I would pick. And it's also, he's a second-term president. He can do things that are a little unpopular.
We're going to continue the conversation, so everybody's sticking around. But coming up, we have Wedbush's Dan Ives on the tech trade and what may be next for Tesla and for Elon Musk. Stay with us right here on CNBC.
We are taking you away from special U.S. election programming to bring you an update on European earnings. UniCredit has raised its guidance for the year after posting better than expected third quarter net profit. Net income for the period topped 2.5 billion euros. The Italian lender now sees full-year profit in excess of 9 billion euros, up 500 million. It also announced plans to pay out half of its profit to shareholders. Speaking to CNBC, the CEO, Andrea Orcel, said taking a stake in Commerzbank was a strategic decision.
We wouldn't be here if we hadn't been invited to buy that stake. And it all started in a way that we thought was constructive. From there is the past. Let's look forward. We are a key investor in Commerzbank. We have more than 21% in the bank. We are actually encouraged by the fact that now Commerzbank is calling for an investor day and is trying to improve its performance. We see Commerzbank and Hypo Vereinsbank as two mirror images. We have the same market share in corporate Germany. We have the same similar market share in Mittelstand of Germany. We are really a carbon copy of each other. And therefore, it's very easy for us to say, well, look at the results of Hypo Vereinsbank, look at the result of Commerzbank in Germany. They need to be very similar. They are not. So as an investor, or something more in the future, we're very keen to see that the management team will move into that direction.
Some voices in Germany say that the trust had been broken, that you bought a stake directly from the government, but that you built another stake separately, and that wasn't clear to them at that moment. Was there a break of trust at that moment?
I think that there are, I can only talk for UniCredit. UniCredit made an investment that was strategic, that is strategic. At the time, we had an opportunity to up it up to 21%, and we did. It is very consistent with our being keen to deploy our capital and extract value from it, either, as I said, through an investment that returns a lot more as the management team of Commerzbank improves the ante and goes better and better, or in a combination with us. And the future will see where that takes us.
You can catch the full interview with the UniCredit CEO, Andrea Orcel, on CNBC.com, and the stock is moving higher in trade and reaction today. Well, that's all for now. We're going to hand you back to our colleagues stateside for more U.S. election coverage.
Back to CNBC and our continuing coverage of the election. We're going to check futures right now, as we've been mentioning all morning long. In the green across the board, the Dow futures up over 1,000 points. That translates to about almost 2.5%. The S&P up over 2% as well. The NASDAQ, actually the laggard, believe it or not, up just over 1.5%. And right now, we want to also take a look at overnight trading of Tesla on the Robinhood platform. Considered to be the biggest and most liquid. Taking a look right now. Tesla up over 9% right now, moving much higher. Again, overnight trading. This is on the Robinhood platform. And joining us now is Wedbush Securities Senior Equity Analyst Dan Ives. Dan, great to have you here. Taking a look at Tesla. A lot of people see this as a Trump trade. By the way, we didn't show it just now, but the Russell futures up over 5%, another Trump trade. But I want to focus on Tesla for a minute. You just put out a note a short time ago. You said this election, potentially the election of Donald Trump, he looks to have a commanding lead in Electoral College. It would actually be good for Tesla, even though it would generally be bad for EVs because of credits would be taken away and other factors that would be headwinds for the industry. Why is it good for Tesla?
It's a dream scenario for any Tesla bull. I mean, I think this could ultimately add $40 to $50 per share to Tesla stock right off the bat. And we could now be talking about $1 trillion and a half market cap for Tesla. Because first off, from an EV perspective, if Trump gets elected, he'll pull the EV tax credits. But that, from a scale and scope perspective, is a positive for Tesla. And that's huge here. And I think the other thing is if Trump gets in, he will fast-track autonomous FSD. Cybercab could get pulled forward about a year. This is really, for a Tesla bull, if you wake up to this, it's exactly what you want to see. And, of course, Musk will clearly have a big voice in a Trump administration.
I want to get to that in just a minute, but I just want to be clear. So you're saying for Tesla, the tailwind is just less regulation. The idea that a Trump administration potentially, again, NBC News has not called the election yet, despite the fact that former President Trump has a lead in Electoral College. But you're saying a Trump administration would have less regulation and allow Elon Musk and Tesla to push forward autonomous driving and full self-driving.
Oh, yeah, I think if you look what's happened in China, I think that would be a top initiative. To fast-track FSD autonomous. There's been a lot of regulatory hurdles, and this is something Musk talked about Robotaxi today. Obviously, the initial sentiment was negative. This is going to be the key, because ultimately, I think Tesla is the most undervalued AI name in the market, and you look what's happened here. This is just more and more going to unlock that opportunity for Tesla and Musk.
I want to clarify for investors. So if you're looking at Tesla stock before tonight, it was up about 4%, 5%. Some of the reasons that it's been underperforming is that people feel like Elon Musk is distracted. He has too many other things going on. The idea of Elon Musk being involved in a Trump administration, potentially being the quote-unquote efficiencies are, why wouldn't that weigh on the stock? Why wouldn't that concern investors?
Yeah, he's going to have a major say, right? From a Trump administration in terms of influence potentially, ultimately really being sort of an advisor, especially when it comes to some of the China issues, AI. And when you look at Tesla, the biggest issue here has really been the regulatory. You look at the tax credits, those get pulled. That's bullish for Tesla, negative for EVs. If you look from a Tesla perspective, Trump getting in, it really becomes, what I view as just an uber bullish scenario for Tesla stock.
All right.
Your note also covers the AI stocks, but I want to talk about Apple for a minute. You and I were talking off camera about how a Trump presidency with Elon Musk as the quote-unquote efficiencies are, it actually could be a positive for Apple because you believe that Elon Musk could be an intermediary between the Trump administration and China.
Yeah, and go back to even in 2018, 2019, there were carve-outs for iPhones. I think the initial knee-jerk here would be, okay, does Apple get caught in a trade war just like Tesla? I think Musk here on the China stuff, you will definitely see carve-outs. I think he understands the China market as well as Cook probably better than anyone. That's why I think here this is going to be good for big tech. You know, I think when it comes to overall AI, but on the China stuff, I don't view that too much of a negative when it comes to Apple. I also think then it comes down to regulatory, right? I mean, the question is, does Khan, the FTC, if she goes away, that's bullish for big tech, bullish for Apple, bullish for Google.
So, I mean, I think the general consensus is that Lina Khan would not be at the FTC if former President Trump is brought back to the White House. I thought it was kind of questionable if she'd be brought back under a Harris administration as well. But you're saying without her there, or even under a Trump administration, the regulation, that headwind when it comes regulation involving, iPhone dominance, search and things, you think that just goes away?
I think that's called a 10%, 15% overhang on some of these tech stocks. Look at Google in terms of some of the antitrust and I think worries there. Apple as well. So from a big tech perspective, Trump getting in, there's clearly some from a China, and we got to see how tariffs play out. But again, I think Musk will probably calm some of that down. Bark will be worse than the bite. From a big tech perspective, Khan out, that's thorn in the side, bullish for big tech, bullish for Tesla. Tomorrow morning, assuming if Trump does get in, this is something where I think this just puts more fuel in the engine for tech rally. NASDAQ 20,000 on the way.
All right, so once again, U.S. futures up big right now. The Dow looks like it would open up about 1,000 points higher. I want to go to some international markets, specifically the Hang Seng. We saw it was under pressure. We're going to show some other Chinese tech stocks like Lenovo, JD.com, and Alibaba under pressure as well. What is a potential Trump re-election? What does it mean for Chinese tech?
Yeah, I think hugely negative for China tech because of some of the regulatory, because of some of the tariffs. And I think if you kind of trajectory this out, this is something that is actually it's bullish for U.S. tech, bearish for China tech, specifically around the AI names. Because right now, how do some of these Chinese companies ultimately get their chips? So you're going to see a lot more regulatory there. I think a lot of that AI premium comes out of some of the China tech names. So that you sit here today, super bullish for U.S. tech, bearish. I'm talking about bears coming out of hibernation mode on China tech.
Let's drill down for a minute when it comes to EVs, specifically those Chinese EVs. Now, they already have tariffs on them if they were to come here to the U.S., but a potential Trump re-election, what does that mean for the Chinese EV industry and just basically North America? In your mind, does that stop any plans they had to try to manufacture those EVs in Mexico and possibly bring them into the U.S.? Does that change other plans on this side of the world?
Yeah, I think it's going to make it extremely difficult for those to come into the U.S. And I think that's something that you could say. That's why Ford, GM, some of these other names are up today, because it feels like now that's not going to happen with Trump in. Clearly bearish for when you look at BYD, NIO, and others, but it just speaks to where we're going. I mean, there's a huge sort of spray chart of possibilities that really go out here, and I think ultimately big tech, Tesla, really on top in terms of beneficiaries, in terms of this scenario, what we could be seeing play out.
One other stock you wanted to talk about was Palantir. Just recently had earnings this week. We saw a big pop following earnings. How does Palantir play into all this? Obviously, Palantir, commercial business that's growing, a defense contractor essentially, a lot of U.S. defense business. With a Trump re-election, how does Palantir come into this?
Look, I mean, I think Inflation Reduction Act clearly could be curtailed. That's negative for Intel, just more pain on that trade. But for Palantir, I think AI initiatives within the government are going to be a huge focus. Within the Beltway, that's going to be probably one of the top priorities, if Trump gets in. Palantir is front and center there. This is going to be a huge tailwind for them, and just showing more and more that continues to be not just the messy of AI, but what I view as a core AI play, not just on enterprise, but in the government, in that 202 area code.
All right, you just mentioned Inflation Reduction Act, a possible repeal of the CHIPS Act. How much of a risk is that for the chip sector? How much of a risk is that for tech overall, considering some of the geopolitical tensions that we have? If we're not manufacturing, or at least ramping up manufacturing of chips here in the U.S., is that a medium-term or long-term risk that investors should be mindful of?
I think it's a risk for names like Intel, I think you could say maybe it's a net positive for NVIDIA, for names that really weren't going down that path. But this is going to have to all play out because I think there could be changes in terms of is more of that focus on AI. But for chips in the U.S., don't hold your breath. If Trump comes in, Intel manufacturing is not going to be here in the U.S.
We got to get back to Contessa and Brian. Before we go, we want to give our audience that were nice enough to stay up all night with us. Give us a couple stocks that you're watching today that you think could see the biggest pop. Tesla's obviously one of them. What are a few others?
I think it's Tesla, Palantir, Microsoft you'd be owning on that trade. You clearly NVIDIA. And then to me, I think there's some other names like even on small cap or mid cap, cybersecurity, I think will be bullish here. Palo Alto, Table Pounder, Zscaler, CrowdStrike, those are names you own on this trade.
All right. Wedbush's Dan Ives, best dressed man on Wall Street. Contessa and Brian, back over to you.
All right, Frank, thank you for that. Up next, we're going to head to Beijing for a live report on how Chinese markets and Chinese state media are digesting tonight's developments. CNBC is back right after this.
Hello, I'm Karen Cho. We are taking you away from U.S. programming to bring you an update on European earnings. A fairly big day playing out here. Commerzbank has posted a better than expected 6.2% drop in net profit in the third quarter to 642 million euros. Commerzbank CEO Bettina Orlopp has told CNBC the bank is cautious when it comes to Germany's economy.
We are now after 9 months with a net income of 1.9 billion, absolutely aligned with our expectations. And if we look forward now by increasing the lending volume on the one side, but also more importantly increasing the net commission income. And that's what you have also seen in the third quarter. Net commission income has been very, very strong. And then overall, we could even increase our outlook for NII for this year from 8.1 to 8.2 billion euros.
Having said that, the environment, especially in Germany, is not very easy. We're seeing also higher loan loss provision or risk result, as you call it. What's your outlook here, and how concerned are you about the state of the German economy and your loan book?
We have been always cautious also for this year with respect to the economic outlook, which also led to our guidance, which we did at the beginning of the year, of the less 800 million of risk result. And nothing has changed on that. We still believe it will be less than 800. And we see an increase of single cases, and that's what you also see reflected in our risk result. Out of the 255 million, approximately 130 million are just really referring to 3 single cases. You have then 70 million for the complete other portfolio, because the rest is very much due to changes in our models and collective staging, which is, I would say, untechnically speaking, also some kind of buffering we do here.
You can catch more from that full interview with Bettina Orlopp on CNBC.com. Now, a quick look at the markets in Europe as we see reaction to the U.S. election. Of course, we're still waiting for NBC to call this one, even though we've seen a victory speech from Trump. But you can see very strong reaction. The market's already moved up more than 1% on the FTSE and across on the DAX, recovering some of the losses that we saw transpire since late last month. So very much on the front foot with gains in healthcare stocks, losses in autos. That's all. I'll hand you back to our U.S. colleagues.
To CNBC's live coverage of the 2024 Your Money, Your Vote election night. And yes, we are indeed live, and we're hitting this as only we can do on CNBC, which is from a markets and data perspective. Dow futures are up more than 1,000. They're up 1,010 points. Biggest open we may have seen in 2 years. Small caps the same. Europe is higher across the board. Germany up 1.5%. The CAC 40 in France up 2%. De rien. That's your welcome in French there. There we go. Asian markets, they are higher across the board, except for China. When you look at the Hong Kong Hang Seng, down 2%. Shanghai, down. Shenzhen Composite, down. The rest of Asia, doing well. China seem to be right in the crosshairs of what is likely to be, not called yet, not over yet, a second Trump presidency. We will wait to call that. Tech stocks in China, they are all down across the board on the likelihood of increased tariffs on many of these companies. All right, let's talk more now about China, their economy, and also what the Chinese media may be saying right now. We don't know, but our friend Eunice Yoon, who is live in Beijing, certainly does. As she joins us, Eunice, it's likely to be a new day there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned the market reaction. Hong Kong led the day's losses, as you had said, because of the weakness that we saw in the tech plays as well as the EV names. A lot of investors still mulling what a potential Trump win could mean for China. As you said, Shanghai, Shenzhen found their footing. A lot of the expectation is that China is going to unveil a fiscal stimulus on Friday, and so people were very much focused on that as well. In fact, earlier in the week, we heard from Nomura, which estimated that a package could be 10 to 20% larger under a Trump win if the former president imposes, as he's pledged, to impose wide-ranging steep tariffs on Chinese-made goods. Now, we also heard from a former government economist who told investors at a Citi event this week that Trump's pledged tariffs at 60% could cut Chinese exports by $200 billion. So Chinese state media, which has been largely quiet up until this moment about the U.S. election, has been ramping up its rhetoric, describing the U.S.-style democracy as what they say unprecedented chaos, to contrast it with China's own one-party rule. The topic of the U.S. election has been widely discussed here. Again, a lot of Chinese companies have been concerned about the short-term volatility and uncertainty that they would see if President Trump were to come in and impose a lot of those tariffs. But there is one winner that people have been discussing here, and that is Elon Musk. Saying that Elon Musk is a de facto vice president of Trump.
Elon Musk definitely got a lot of high-profile praise from Donald Trump at his speech in West Palm Beach, Florida, Eunice. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate that. Let's stay on China and bring in Dewardric McNeil. He's the managing director and senior policy analyst at Longview Global, also a CNBC contributor. And we have Allianz Chief Economic Advisor Mohamed Al-Erian still with us as well. Dewardric, when you're looking at this, this standoff that we saw during the former Trump presidency between the United States and China, especially where tariffs were concerned, what do you expect to see, and how soon do you expect to see some major reaction from China?
Well, I think China's very concerned about the rhetoric around tariffs. I think what they will wait to see is what actually happens. But unlike 2018, Contessa, China has developed a whole range of tools to hit back. You know, in 2018, it was agriculture. I think now what China has really developed are tools to go after the critical mineral supply chain and some of the advanced manufacturing supply chains that we need for a clean energy transition if we're still going down that path. So I think China will be slow, patient, and opportunistic. But I think there is some concern, at least on the financial side of the house, about a Trump presidency. But I don't think everyone in China, quite frankly, will be upset by this, because if Trump continues to do what he said he was going to do, and that's oppose across-the-board tariffs, including some of our allies and partners, well, China sees that as an opening to get closer to Europe in a way that they've been seeking to do during the Biden administration, but have just had no real room or opportunity to do so.
We're showing the Asia tech stocks right now. Alibaba off by 4%, JD.com off by 4%, and others. Mohamed, when you're looking at it's not just the Chinese equities, but it does, when there's a Cold War in trade between China and the United States, it has a trickle-down effect across a lot of economies. How do you see this?
So first, I see it as complicating China's life enormously. Even before tonight, China had an internal economic problem, and China saw global growth turn from tailwinds to headwinds. Now China has to worry about more tariffs. And this notion, Contessa, that they can simply implement stimulus and everything's going to be fine is wrong. There's a reason why they haven't done that in the past, and that is because stimulus is helping an old economic model they're trying to evolve from. Where I completely agree with what has just been said is that China is going to take advantage of this situation in order to get more countries to buy into its alternative system. Now, its alternative system isn't as comprehensive, isn't as efficient as the dollar-based system, but China is going to continue to push it hard.
DeWardrick, there's also a military aspect here, and I certainly am no expert in this, but we know what the former president has said about his support, or maybe lack thereof, for Ukraine, and there's an idea that his militaristic eye will turn more toward China, which is a different, which would be more direct adversary rather than sort of a proxy fight. Number one, do you believe that? And number two, if we see the U.S. turn a little more aggressive militarily with China, what does that look like? Does Xi Jinping just start making deals with us, or does he dig in and take a harder line?
Well, I think what Xi is going to do is really deploy what I call a comprehensive national power set of tools. So it won't be necessarily a harder military line, although I think he certainly would not shy away from that. But China has a range of tools that it can deploy. China has lots of agency. So I do think that we're going to see a pivot back to Asia if some of the Trump foreign policy names that I know make it into this administration. Okay. They believe we've been distracted, certainly with Ukraine. And that will pose a challenge for China, for sure. But I don't think we should look at this in just a defense space. China will deploy a range of tools to try and compete with the U.S. My fear here, Brian, is that this managed competition that we've been seeing over the last 4 years will fade away, and that the Trump administration and China will engage in just pure raw competition.
DeWardrick McNeil, Longview Global, always appreciate your insight. Mohamed El-Erian will be sticking around with us as well. Mohamed, thank you very much for that. All right, coming up, folks, it is not called yet. We'll get the latest exit poll data coming in from 2 more critical states, ones that could certainly tip the balance over 270 electoral votes. Dow futures, they are up over 1,000 points, 1,133 points. Small caps up, bond yields up, gold's up. We're glad you're up, because we're still up. And we're back right after this.
Hello, I'm Karen Cho. We're taking you away from our special U.S. election programming for a quick check on how markets here in Europe are reacting to the U.S. election. Now, you're hearing in our coverage, NBC News has not projected a winner of the U.S. presidential race, yet markets are already reacting in anticipation of a Trump victory. And you can see that the Stock Strip 600, very strong positioning this morning, been trading for almost 1 hour, and you can see a pop now of close to 1.9%. This has been building throughout the morning, and a reflection of what we're already seeing stateside, that U.S. markets will be off to a strong start later on today in reaction. Let's just peel away and take a look at some of those individual indices to see where we're positioned, because we are quickly recovering a lot of the lost market action that we saw in the last number of weeks. Late October, these markets seem to start selling off, but we're recouping all of that lost ground instantly in trade today. 1.5% up on the FTSE 100. The DAX over in Germany, 1.5% pop, even stronger now for the French market, more than 2% in the green, and the Italian stock market joining the party, 1.3% higher. A big plays at a sector level too. I want to show you some of the early winners. Keep in mind there's also earnings season rolling on in the backdrop, so there are some big single name stocks that are moving, and particularly in healthcare. Novo Nordisk, one of the early healthcare reporters today, but there is a view that some of these areas could benefit under a future Trump administration if that is the outcome we're talking about here. So travel and leisure very strong, more than 3% to the upside. Healthcare in particular, and don't forget Trump's comments to date. He doesn't have specific plans for healthcare, for Obamacare, but he has concepts of a plan. Financial services, that is a very strong trade, 2.8% in the green. Media also seen as a winner today, 2.7% higher. The big losers that we're seeing already in the European market, early on it has been utilities, which is really the exposure around green energy plays. We're seeing some underwhelming trade there. I can tell you right at the bottom of the boards has been the likes of EDP. We've got Ørsted, Vestas, some of the early losers. Auto names in the basket, BMW, Volvo Cars. These are companies with big links to the Chinese market around EV production, but also broader concerns that foreign cars could be targeted under any future Trump administration. Telecoms, oil and gas a tricky one, as we know, when it comes to whether we could see more drilling in the United States that has supply implications. So that particular area of the market has been more cautious, although it is now moving into the green with other stock trades. So as you can see, a lot of positioning taking place already in Europe this morning. Let me wrap it up there and hand you back to our colleagues stateside for more U.S. election coverage.
It is just about 4 o'clock in the morning here on the east coast of the United States, 1 a.m. out west. Glad you're with us. We are here live at CNBC headquarters for the Your Money, Your Vote election night coverage. And markets, they are moving in a big, big way. Let's take a quick look. Dow futures up 1,145 points. NASDAQ futures up 357. One of the biggest moves that we have seen. Small caps, not going to show them to you, small caps up 5% right now. A potential Trump victory could have big implications for the bond market as well. Piper Sandler, research firm Wall Street, has called him the king of debt because we wonder where will debts and deficits go. 10-year Treasury yield has moved up the last month or so, moving up a little bit today, back to 4.4. It was at 3.66 just 1 month ago. What about precious metals? If you talk about inflation, you're really talking about gold. Gold continues to make, it's not right now at a record high, but had just made some. It is at 2,732. The metal complex is down a bit, but gold had earlier hit a record. What about individual names? We've told you the Coinbases, the Teslas of the world, they're soaring. Here's a few names that may be off your radar. These are live trades right now, real time. Robinhood, Geo Group,